when you talk about Zionism, there's all these kind of like frameworks, like these themes that come along with it, like a mind map, right? Like, so you think about Zionism. If you read Rashid Khalidi's book, you probably heard about Zionism entails ethnic cleansing, imperialism, Jewish supremacy, displacement or transfer, imperialism, settler colonialism. Why does refuge never get mentioned? Most Jews believe that if they sort of like give up most of their external Jewishness and they assimilate to become Poles or French or Russians or whatever else, then they will be accepted and they'll be safe. Zionists were the minority who said no. Assimilating will not help us. We will always be Jews. Modern nationalism is going to fuck us everywhere we go. They were right. Throughout the beginning and the middle of the 20th century, progressively, every country closes their doors. The Evian conference in the middle of the fucking Holocaust is basically like, yeah, that's bad, but I don't know, did they have to come here? After they saw the camps, I think America made an exception for like a few 100,000 Jews, but Johnson Reed stayed in place. They kept their quotas. Rest of the European countries kept their quotas. There was a pogrom in Poland in 1946 after the war ended where 1,000 Jews were killed. So these people had nowhere else to go.
Stream. I think that's good. That's good. That is in frame. Make this full screen. Oh man, I look awful. So tired. All right, go live.
What's the story?
We'll do it live. Oh!
What's the story behind the hat?
I just started wearing it at like a rally in Washington D.C. and it stuck, and I'm just like, whatever. I'm just gonna keep doing this. I guess I don't know. It's just like a gimmick now that I do. There's no good reason to have it, but
it works though. I think people need more gimmicks. Like I'm a big wrestling fan. From the 90s and shit.
Exactly. So, and I literally I'm the heel to Mr. Beat, right? Like now every time we meet up in real life, we'll have like a dumb little like wrestling moment. Oh, hold on, I gotta go live. Okay. All right, you Zionist pig, let's get this started. No.
Yeah.
So basically, hi. Nice to talk to you again. We've been in some debates. I got a lot of flack for my Israel comments. I am self-admittedly uneducated on the topic. I've read a couple books. I've done basic, not much research into it, and curious to see, as the well-read person, what you can tell me, whether or not you can change my opinions on some things, or if we can just talk about stuff. So basically, I figured I'd just like Joe Rogan you and just be like, "What's going on? Like, what is this? What are they doing?" And yeah.
Well, you said you'd read some books. Like which ones? More than one?
I've read like 2 or 3, but the one I can remember is the 100 Years War in Palestine. I read that like a year or two ago. But it's been a while since I read
Khalidy, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I was going to say,
yeah.
if you've read one book on the topic, you probably know more than like 99% of people who are talking about it, so that's cool.
But like my takeaway from that book was like nothing about my priors or my like overall knowledge of it has changed. Like I have more background and I understand like, oh, this is the year this happened, and oh, that was worse than I thought it was. But like basically, like just to sum up my position on it. Growing up, I always knew there was a conflict. I always knew it was because there's established Israel in the 40s. This is a bunch of, conflicts are happening over the land and who deserves it and who's killing who. And I thought it was just always a big clusterfuck. Like that's always just kind of how I viewed it. It's not a something I had like a strong moral position on, but just like, wow, like that's a fucked up thing in the Middle East that's happening. And since then, obviously it's blown up post October 7th. And now I'm like, okay, it seems to me that Israel's actions in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are like over the line of what I would consider justified and like, oh, self-defense, self-determination or whatever they're doing. And something should be done, but I don't know the prescription of what needs to be done. But that's like the rough, very layman understanding that I have of the whole situation.
Okay. So there are probably going to be things I'm going to want to ask you throughout, but like I guess you said you wanted to start by asking me some questions. So
I've got like a whole bunch of questions. And I don't know, like I don't know, like if you want to restructure this, feel free. But basically, like one of the big things for me is people like to use this topic or this point that there is a contingency of people in Palestine or just in the Middle East in general that like hate Israel, that hate Jewish people, and if you were to like integrate a large portion of this population, this would cause the destruction through like mass, overthrow of the democracy, aka a majority of the voters would be anti-Jewish people in general, and therefore there's no way to perpetually have Israel as its own state, as a Jewish state, without ethnically cleansing people or like racial quotas. And my question for you is like, is this true? If it is true, does that justify the, racial quotas? And is there a solution to that?
Okay, so the first one you made was that like there's the belief that that Palestinians there's too many of them are too predisposed against Jews and Israelis, that if they became like a sizable voting bloc, they would just fuck the Jewish population, basically. Is that the first thing you said? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you believe that?
I'm open to the idea that there's just like a large contingent of people in the Middle East that are like, I hate Israel and I hate Jewish people. Like, this is just very clear to me based on like the polls that I've seen, whether or not that's like a anti-Semitic thing or just like, hey, this country has been, blowing up my family or my ancestors for decades. Like, it's kind of irrelevant to me. Like, clearly there is an animosity there. Yeah. So like, if you were to show me thing, it was like, if the Hamas charter is like, oh, we want to eradicate Israel. It's like, yeah, like that checks out. I believe that to be the case. I think I've since changed it since then. But like, even if, there's two parts of this. It's like, even if this were true, I don't know if that necessarily justifies the ethnic cleansing stuff or the racial quota stuff. But yeah, I guess tackle it in two parts. Is it true? And if it is true, then what?
Okay. Well, I guess so. To this day, I think the most popular movement in Palestine is still Hamas. Like between West Bank and Gaza, Hamas are still would blow out any election if they. I think if Barghouti came out of jail, the guy who's from the opposition group to Fatah to Hamas would probably win a presidential. But as far as parties go, Hamas is still the most popular. So yeah, like I think it probably is quite.
They have majority support. Just on that note, if I remember correctly, they're not actually that popular like within the Palestinian.
So in the West Bank, they are by far the most popular party over Fatah. Yeah. In Gaza, they're actually a bit less popular than they are in the West Bank, ironically. Yeah. But
yeah, I'm
as far as I know, they
40
still have
to 50% support or something like that.
Yeah, because like what you'll see is even if you see like 40, 50, then you'll see Fatah getting something like, well, between like 15, 20, 30, and then it's like then there's a bigger chunk that's just like undecided or
sure.
Yeah.
Or it's like some people view this as the best option, but a majority don't support any group, I think, in the West Bank or Gaza.
I think in the West Bank, Hamas are definitely the most popular. I don't know if it's plurality or majority. That does fluctuate a lot.
I'm saying like, yeah, 40, similar, like 40, 50-ish, like somewhere between then and the different things I just Googled. Again, this is all like layman. I'm just Googling random stuff.
Yeah. But in any case, I think again, like with polling, I think the better thing to look at for that particular question, because that's about the question of like, should they all integrate into one country? The better response to that one, I think, is Palestinians don't want it. If you look at polling, there's usually three options that are given by PSR, like probably the most reliable pollsters in that region. And they'll ask them, do you want like one state with equality, one state without equality, or two states? And the one state with equality for both groups is always bottom for both Israelis and Palestinians. Neither of them want it. Like, I think the highest I ever saw for like a democratic one state solution, when it's side by side with an undemocratic one, I think is maybe like 15-20%. But yeah, like this whole binational one state solution that people talk about with equal rights for Arabs and Jews, like the only people who talk about that with any sense of like realism or optimism are like Westerners. Like in the region, there's no popular leader who's backing this on either side. There's no party that's backing it. There's no broad movement. Like it doesn't have any sway in that region. It's like they're either all or nothing or two states. Yeah, that's kind of how that goes.
Okay. And then what's like the primary opposition then to this two states? Because that does kind of throw away the like whole voting scare part, right?
The opposition to two states now, I guess, comes from that's a bit more complicated. So with Palestinians, they're and pollsters don't ask this for some reason. I think they should. Is that you said that earlier that Hamas updated their charter, right? They never actually, so they never actually updated their charter. They published a new document with a different name, and one leader said that, we're more like anti-Zionist than anti-Jew now, right? Like that was basically, but like the language in it shifts a lot more away from the religious anti-Semitic thing to the more anti-Zionist narrative. But the charter never actually formally replaced the old one. The old one is still there. Like there's never been any like Hamas vote or anything like that, or any like Hamas leadership official decision to remove the old charter. And that's done for a good reason, because in Arabic, like the more hardline Hamas leaders, when that happened, had to reassure their supporters that the charter had not changed, that it hadn't actually been removed. So that was like, to me, that was more of a PR statement. But even if you take it on face value, even if you believe the new charter doesn't say two-state solution. It says 67 borders, which is different. It says two states, but we don't recognize Israel, and we don't have to give Israel anything. As in, like, they're just saying Israel should unilaterally give us our state, but we don't give up our aspiration for all of the rest of it. So Hamas's position since 2017, and a little bit before that, was to say, we are going to say that we expect, they don't actually expect it, but we're going to say that we want Israel to just give us our state, for them all to leave the West Bank and Gaza, and we will just use that new state to try and get the rest back later. But I don't think I ever see enough Palestinians getting asked a question of like, do you want two states for now, or do you want a two-state solution? As in, like, do you want two states and then the conflict is over? That's the bit I've never really had a good answer to about what they actually want with regards to that question. Israelis obviously don't want two states because they believe that they used to in the 90s and 2000s, but now they basically believe that any bit of land they ever concede to places where there are terrorist organizations, anytime they give up that land, then that land comes back to bomb them with rockets and cross-border attacks, right? So they'll say, well, we left Lebanon in 2000, we went all the way past wherever the UN wanted us to, and then Hezbollah just used that territory to stockpile 200,000 rockets and to cross-border operations and things like that. We left Gaza in 2005, and then Hamas got elected like a year later. So that's kind of their narrative. And then obviously they believe that if they give the West Bank up as two states, then they think that that's going to be a territory that's 16 times the size of Gaza, where Hamas are the most popular party. And if they just give that up without any assurance on the other side, then that land will also get used as a springboard for like an October 7th style attack like Gaza was. So that's kind of why both groups reject it. But as far as changing that, like, I think two states is the only way. Like, there's no other way you can solve that conflict without Palestinians having their own sovereignty in their area and Israelis having theirs. They cannot live together, not for 100 years at least. If they want to, they can, but they don't want to. And they can't live in what's happening now, where you have settlers constantly harassing and humiliating Palestinians in the West Bank, with Gaza being used as a military base by Hamas, and then Israel coming and responding in the most insane, like, disproportionate way possible, and thinking that the only way to deal with Hamas and their tunnels is to bomb the entire thing to oblivion. Like, you can't have, it's unsustainable. Like, you need to have them, there needs to be a two-state solution for both groups. I'd even argue that the settlement expansion is actually suicidal on Israel's part as well, because if they keep expanding into the West Bank, then you're kind of just asking for a situation where settlers become so embedded and so unmovable that Palestinians aren't going anywhere. They're still going to be there. And now Israel's in a position where settlers are living there for 1, 2, 3 generations. They're eventually going to get incorporated into Israel. They're going to get annexed. But then if you're annexing territory that also has Palestinians there, you have a choice. You're going to have to either give them voting rights and make them citizens, or you have them as citizens without voting rights, which means you actually become a de jure apartheid state, which will destroy Israel, like, on the world stage completely. So, yeah, there needs to be two states. And I think the problem when it comes to international pressure is that there are reasons that both groups actually need to be pushed into this position. I think with Palestinians, there's just been way too much of a tendency of rejectionism, too much of a unwillingness to commit to a final decision on two states like they did in the 2000s. There's too much of a belief that Israel is a temporary thing, like a temporary blotch on the Middle East that will one day go away. And with Israelis, there's this idea that they believe the Palestinian statehood question is just an inconvenience that can be pushed on the back burner forever. That would be my summary of, like, how the conflict needs to end. I've never heard any better proposal.
Okay. And so, but it sounds to me like, even though you clearly say this is what needs to happen
Hmm.
in order to give both of these people self-determination, neither party is going to push seriously for this. Like one party, Israel says, if we do this, we'll get bombed more. And the Gazans and the West Bankers are like, well, this is, an abdication of what is rightfully ours, and this won't happen. This is like still confining us. This is still unfair. So, like, is this even remotely possible, or is it just going to kind of exist in the way it already does now, perpetually? If like, because that this goes back to like the view I had when I was like 12 and first learned about this, and it's like, when are these people ever going to agree on something? And it seems like never. um
Okay, so yeah, if what you're saying is what's more likely, obviously what's more likely is the status quo just continues until Palestine as a state is physically impossible. Like that's unfortunately the most likely scenario. But yeah, what I'm saying might be quote unquote impossible. It's more possible than anything else. It's the only thing that the two groups have ever come close to. They came close to two states once. Like it was a few decisions away, either at Camp David or at Taba, that could have possibly done it. And the Israelis wanted it. They voted for it. The Palestinians voted for it at that point. I think it has to happen one way or the other. And as far as Western, like it depends on which government is doing what, though, right? Like the Western governments, I think, have been too soft on Netanyahu in his positioning. Obviously, Donald Trump is a green light. Biden, I think, on his way out after October 7th, was starting to make moves that were more aggressive towards Netanyahu. He was starting to sanction settlers, which had never been done before. He was withholding arms shipments in the middle of a war, which America hadn't done for a good while. There was more opportunity, I think, to had a Democrat stayed, I think you might start to see withholding of economic aid and economic projects that might like quite similar to what Bush Senior did in the 90s. But again, like yeah, it doesn't seem that likely, but it's literally the only way. There's no other way around it. Like it's either
when you say
that
it's not
or
that likely, it's like, no one in power seems to be taking these proposals seriously. No American government like has, in my view, gotten close to pushing for this. So not just like it's unlikely, it seems like this is just never going to happen. Like it almost seems inevitable that one of these groups is just going to like wipe out the other one until there is no other side of an argument and they get their way, right? Like unless some like what would need to happen for that push for a two-state to like to go forward? Like is there even anything remotely close?
Yeah, I think so. I think two things need to happen. There have been things close in the past. I would say with Clinton and the Clinton parameters, and even with Olmert, things. Yeah, I think they've been close, and they voted for it as well. The Israelis voted for someone who ran, like Ehud Barak, who ran on two states for Israel and Palestine, on like finishing the conflict. Palestinians voted for Arafat, who had signed the Oslo Accords, which was leading towards two states. So we know that they've wanted this in the past. I think two things need to change broadly. Israel on that side needs to change in the sense that, well, obviously the country needs to change internally. Like they can't keep following this Netanyahu like status quo settlement expansion idea that they can just forget that Palestinians are people with aspirations for statehood and everything like forever. Western powers can change in the sense that they can, I think they should remain allies with Israel, but as allies, they should be willing to draw lines and to say, like, for example, the Abraham Accords and how peace with the Arab nations came at the cost of completely ignoring the Palestinian issue. I think European powers should be able to keep their positions, their allyship with Israel, but whilst also being very clear that there needs to be some appetite for like progressing towards a solution, if not even like stopping settlements. And there should be repercussions for not doing that. There should be things like if you're going to pass this law which expands the Israeli civil judiciary into the West Bank to places it hadn't been before, then it's like, okay, well, then you're going to lose like $1 billion off of your budget. Then fuck you. Like that needs to happen much more clearly and much more like, you do this, you lose that. You don't do this,
Okay.
you keep that. That needs to be very clear. On the
Well, so
Palestinian
this kind
side,
of
like,
leads
yeah.
into, well, this kind of leads into more of the questions I had. I mean, like, so like what are your strongest criticisms is like of Israel, maybe as a state, of the current government? And it seems like you already kind of have these like prescriptions of what needs to be done. But yeah, like what are the worst things that they are doing, and why they are preventing some sort of solution from being reached?
Um, mainly in the sense that like Israeli right wingers are so good at exploiting fear and like dread. Like, so every time that rockets go over, or every time there's a terrorist attack, or every time people are just even made aware that Hezbollah exists across the border, or that like Hamas is across the border, they will, and every time that a Western power goes against them, they will exploit that. They will tell their people that, yes, look, we are Jews. We are still Jews. Everyone hates us. So, like, that's never going to change. We're never going to find sanctuary anywhere else in the world. The only way to survive in this neighborhood is to be as strong and aggressive as possible. We need to let people know that if they fire one shot at us, we'll fire 8,000 at them. Like, that's basically their position. And it's based on the principle called the Iron Wall from like the 20s. That's the idea that if they just assert themselves with dominance, then eventually people will get fed up of fighting them and accept their existence and realize that fighting them is not worth it. That works with countries. It worked with Egypt. It worked with Jordan. It might be working with Lebanon right now. They've had talks for the first time in 30 years, but it's not going to work with Palestine because they don't have a country. Like, they have nothing to lose really in that regard.
Yeah,
so,
I was going to say that like the distinguishing factor is like,
yeah,
they don't exist with like a day-to-day life of freedom and self-determination that like, yeah, Lebanon or Egypt does, right? So like, while they can say, all right, maybe we're upset with this country and their actions here, like there is some tacit peace between them if we just kind of leave them alone, whereas the other one is occupied or they can't leave, or there's some other circumstances that say like, yeah, like what do I have to lose by continuing this fight, right?
Yeah, so they're in a position where with Israelis as well. I would say that Israel's actually in a similar position to America to a very different degree, but like they are being taken over by like far right people who don't really care that much for like a lot of these like liberal democratic principles that the country was like on paper was built on. Like even the IDF and all their practices in Gaza, like believe it or not, like the IDF still has like a code of conduct. They still have lawyers and they still have like people who will train their soldiers and their officers, and they'll teach each other about like Israeli massacres from the past, like where Israelis committed war crimes, like in the 48 war, and they'll say like, this is why you should always disobey an illegal order. This is what an illegal order is. This is why we don't do that. Like they teach these things, but then they appoint a bunch of like division commanders and people who are in charge of hundreds or thousands of soldiers, and they'll just appoint people who ignore them, right? They'll appoint people who ignore these rules, and the government won't prosecute anyone with these rules. So you get this issue where they are just kind of like abandoning so many of their like principles that they claim make them like the more democratic Western like country in the Middle East. And it's all built on this idea that they think like the Palestinian problem can just be pushed on the back burner forever. So I think the left needs to like, internally, they need to, the left needs to win that argument. They need to win the argument that you have two choices. Either you're going to annex this territory, Gaza and the West Bank, in which case you have 5 million people added to your population who you apparently don't want, and you become actually just an apartheid state by your own rules, by your own stated rules, or you separate and you have two states. And they need to understand that like this is like the only dichotomy that they're ever going to have to deal with.
Give me a sec. You just cut out after only.
This is the only like choice that they're ever going to have. It's status quo can only last until like one or the other becomes inevitable. Like either they annex all of it and then have to become an actual apartheid state, top to bottom, or they have to separate.
You say actual apartheid, like people will accuse it of being one. Do you think it like doesn't qualify as one, and why not, I guess?
I mean, right now it's a military occupation of like the West Bank and I guess now like Gaza. That's what it is. So like a military occupation, you don't expect military occupations to have like equal rules for everyone. You could say the practices are very apartheid-like they look very apartheid and they feel like apartheid, but an apartheid state would be like, there's a reason that Israel proper has very different rules for Palestinians than the West Bank does, right? Palestinians who live in Israel can vote, they can get an education, they have affirmative action programs, they have the government sometimes giving them extra money for some things. The West Bank is not Israel proper though. It's not annexed by Israel. Actually, most Israelis don't want to annex the whole West Bank. They want to annex bits of it maybe, but like, so when I say actual apartheid, I mean, if Israel actually starts to say, we're making all of this our country, well, then now you're saying it's not an occupation anymore. Now this is Israel. Like Ramallah is Israel, Nablus is Israel, but the people in here
So it seems like
don't
a
have
like a
voting
distinction
rights.
without a difference, right? I mean, like obviously, yes, under military occupation, you're going to have different rules. But like if the people within are living as if it was an apartheid state, regardless of why that rule is being implemented because of military or because it's a country that says this is just the rules basically when there's no war going on, either way, they're feeling the consequences of that. So like, does that distinction really matter, or like there's like a moral weight, and we're going to get into like the definitions and like behind the moralism behind definitions. Like why does that matter? That it's the occupation and not an actual apartheid state or whatever, right?
I think it matters because Israel always tries to deny being an apartheid state. But if they annex the West Bank, like you said, I mean, yeah, for Palestinians, not much would change. They'd still be under the same rules, and it would still be, they'd still have the same apartheid experience they've got right now. But
Right.
Israel as a country can no longer say, we're not an apartheid state. Like, because people who defend Israel, like right now, or even I would say this, I don't think Israel's an apartheid state. I think what they're doing in the West Bank is akin to apartheid. But if they actually go ahead and annex it and say, even according to our own rules, this is ours, then, well, now you're just becoming the thing that you kept claiming you're not. Like, so they're doing it
So
de
it's
jure
just
as
like
well as de facto.
Right, like
That's what I mean. I'm saying like de
like
facto becomes de
right, like
jure.
the
Yeah.
consequences for the, like you said, for the civilians are pretty much no different, but it gives the Israeli government like a cover of like, well, technically we're not, this isn't our state, but like is that just for what, negotiating tactics, or to just kind of like, you know, leverage that if someone says, hey, you're doing a human rights abuse here, and it's like, well, it's not, you know, our country, we're not doing this as a prescription of our laws, we're doing it based on an occupation and an ongoing war. Is it like, what is the reason for that distinction if ultimately it matters not at all to the civilians whether or not it is technically apartheid or not?
Well, because it matters to Israel, because obviously if Israel annexes the West Bank, they have to bring in their entire, because right now there's like there's there's like a different administration, like there's a different institution that is that takes care of civil administration of the West Bank. Like it's divided into, you know, like the PA controls some areas, and then there's joint control in area B, and then there's Israeli in area C. If all that goes away, then on one side, like the reason Israel, you're asking me why Israel doesn't just annex all of the West Bank?
No, well, I'm
Or
not asking that. I'm just asking like why, when if you were to push back and say, well, technically it's not an apartheid state because blah blah blah, occupation here, it's not part of Israel. Sure, I understand the distinction. My question is like, why uphold this distinction when it seems to like the ultimate worth of that
Okay.
term is that people see that other people are being treated differently because of who they are, right? And people want that to stop. Is it the Israeli government withhold or upholding that distinction to say, well, because we don't want to, like, you know, if we were to go in and annex it, then we would have to classify it that way. Sure, I understand why they don't want to, but why does that definition even matter
like, why
in this
do
case?
I mean, it doesn't actually matter that much to me. Like the buzzword, like I'll call what happens in the West Bank apartheid like all day. Like I don't give a fuck. But like like why I would say that Israel's not an apartheid state now is because like I want to be able to call it something different when it does something different, which is annexes the West Bank. Like if they actually go ahead and say themselves, yes, we are going to make all of this Israel, but not everyone who lives in Israel and is born in Israel will be an Israeli citizen and have Israeli voting rights. Yeah, I want to call that something a little bit different to what they're doing now. Also, the reason I guess I don't commit to like it's all an apartheid state or like one state reality right now, I get is because whenever I hear people using that term, I feel like they're using it to try and push the apartheid solution to Israel, which is like the South Africa solution, which is it should just become one state with equal rights for everyone. But then you get into the problem we came to earlier, which is that, well, no one in there wants that. So I just think it like, but again, to me, that's like the semantic part to me, like is not really as important to me. I just don't really care that much about it. I'd rather just talk about like the things that are going
Right,
on.
right. It depends on like why people are calling it that, and this will kind of lead into the next question. But yeah, it's like if it is definitely an apartheid state, then you're saying this because you necessitate a one-state solution, or you think, hey, equal rights for everyone, and this might not be the best solution given whatever party wants in that area. So I understand that. But then I guess, yeah, moving on. I mean, like, so the whole conversation of like, oh, is it a genocide or not? Like, some people say, well, technically, based on X definition, it doesn't meet this, therefore. Whereas I look at it and I say, okay, I see people being cleansed from their homes. I see the intention of the government to push out populations. And whether or not you call that the same thing as the G word doesn't matter as much as this is what is ultimately happening to these people, and I think something needs to be done about it, or like the government needs to be held accountable. How do you view that distinction of like, is it a genocide? Is it not a genocide? What necessitates that? Like, if it's not, why? Well, there's a million questions. Like, why is that in conflict with these organizations? Like, so maybe get into that a little bit.
Okay, so broadly speaking, genocide is a legal term that has been practiced very little in international law. There's not that much legal precedent. There's a very specific definition. I, I honestly like. Personally tried to get as far away as possible from like going into this, because I think these categories are supposed to be there for people who already know and already agree on the facts. They're just talking about like how should it they're talking about like umbrella terms. So if I want to talk about Stalin putting all of the Crimean Tatars on trains and sending them off to Uzbekistan or whatever, well, we'll just say, well, the ethnic cleansing in Crimea, and then most historians will know exactly what I'm talking about. I don't need to talk about the details. When people say the genocide in Gaza, I don't know if they're talking about like what they've read in the ICJ. I don't know if they're talking about some meme that they saw on fucking Twitter that says the death toll is actually 600,000. I don't know what factual basis they're drawing that on. And to me, it just like it doesn't actually help the conversation that much at all. I think it's a kind of like a fruitless debate to go into like the legal aspect of like the genocide convention. I mean, I'll do it for its own sake, I guess, but like, let's say I think most people understand this though. Like to me, the way I see the word genocide being used in Gaza is I see it being used as a shortcut to maybe not everyone not agreeing on all the facts. I think I see it as people like using it as a thought-terminating cliche. I think I see people using it to purity test. Like I just don't think it serves that much value the way it's being used. And I think you shouldn't need to get a concession on like a particular legal term.
Sorry, you cut out for me again. Shouldn't need.
You shouldn't need to get a concession on a particular legal term to like have a discussion or to see where someone stands on an issue, right?
Yeah.
And everyone knows this, right? If you were grilling someone who's you suspected of being an anti-Semite or a neo-Nazi, you would maybe ask them about the Holocaust, and you might say, well, how many Jews died in the Holocaust? You wouldn't say, did the Nazis commit a genocide? That's usually not your instinct, as far as I know.
Right, like whether or not you would call the Holocaust a genocide is irrelevant to how I view it morally, what should be done, how the people who committed it should be seen, and
and
like
you might even be giving the Nazi an out, right? Because he might say, yeah, of course the Nazis committed genocide, but in his head he's like, they actually only killed 200,000 people, like the Red Cross meme or whatever, right?
Or the intent was there, but they didn't do anything.
Yeah. Or they might be actually referring to the Slavs, but not the Jews. Like the Jews, it was all self-defense or some bullshit. Yeah, like that's what they would. Yeah. So I think it's better to just go into the facts of what's happening.
Okay, so then I mean, I agree with the like semantic argument, but then if we're going into the facts, why do like so many international communities call it this based on their definition? Why do so many people oppose said definition? And like how did the prescriptions change based on whether or not they are right to call it that?
To me, most of it comes down to just factual disagreements and the way data is collected in the middle of a war where information deficits are quite big. I mean, if you want to go into like specific UN reports or different logging, but like I think with a lot of what's happened in the war, although again, I'll say a million times that I think like systematic war crimes is at least what Israel's done in Gaza, like not just oopsies and bad apples, but actually like the government's allowed war crimes to happen from the top down and not cared about it or even welcomed it. But making the genocide argument, like a lot of the factual basis that a lot of these reports are sort of like backing themselves up with, to me, I just think some of it has fallen short. So like I can go into some details. Like I think with the way that the aid situation was described and the famine situation was reported by UN organizations or by the IPC, I think they were just quite flawed and they didn't seem to hold up to the same standards that they have for other conflicts. I think the way that that certain statements were interpreted by Israeli politicians didn't really add up. And I think disputes about death tolls and like who actually makes up the death toll, like to this day, I don't think we have any consensus on how many of those 70,000 were Hamas visors. No one said, right? I think the IDF said they believe it's like 20, 25,000 or 30,000, which would mean like just a bit under 30, 40%, which would be like, there are lots of urban wars where that's happened. But Hamas haven't said how many militants they've lost. And the human rights organizations haven't even, as far as I know, they haven't even commented much on that part.
Right. So, it's hard to also just get an accurate number because it's not like everyone is wearing a uniform. You've got essentially an entire area, square footage of rubble that is like, all right, like how are you even able to collect data from this? There's no, you can just kind of look at like who used to live here and who's not alive anymore, and then try from there. I guess it's not exactly a hard science.
And
So I understand the
especially
ambiguity there.
especially given the fact that like Hamas, I don't know if you know this, but like Hamas in the past conflicts in 2014, for example, they literally issued out public statements telling their members not to report dead militants. Like, don't say anything if a soldier has died. If anyone asks, like a human rights org or whatever calls you and asks you if someone died in this house, you always put them as an innocent citizen, an innocent civilian, unconditionally.
Okay.
So they have an incentive to hide their dead, obviously, because they reap all of the
Well,
rewards.
on the same side, I mean, the IDF
war,
has
right?
an incentive to downplay civilian casualties, of course, right?
Yeah, of course
like,
they do. Yeah. So
yeah,
and they also have an incentive. I mean, they also have a very a broader understanding of what's a soldier than I think most NATO countries do. But yeah, so that's one of like
yeah,
quite a few
it makes
examples
it
of
more
where
ambiguous,
there's
more
issues with
messy.
that.
But then like what are the facts that I don't know, the international communities that have formed these opinions based on, and are they faulty bases, or they're based on more ambiguity, or do they use a different definition of like a genocide, or yeah?
Amnesty did have a bit in their report where they are contesting like understood definitions of genocide. I think there was also some scandal with them more recently where they withheld their October 7th report on Hamas's attacks because of its political implications, which I think is a very strange thing for a human rights org to be doing. But I'll give you one example because like the war claims specifically there's a lot of them. I'll give you one specific example. I don't know if you ever heard this claim that pre October 7th, there used to be 500 trucks going into Gaza of aid.
I've probably heard like the vague claims. Yeah,
Okay.
but yeah, not the specifics.
So that's never been the case, especially when they're talking about when they're comparing it to the amount of food trucks that are going in post October 7th. So the 500 trucks thing basically comes from like a poor stat of before the war, aid trucks would only go in on weekdays. And it would include not just food and shelter and everything else, but it would also include like building materials and electrical equipment and concrete. And after the war, the only trucks that were going in were aid, tents, food, water, etc., some fuel trucks. But then what people did was that they took the average of aid trucks before then on the weekdays, called that the daily, excluding the weekends, and then got this number that sometimes on some months looked like closer to 500, if even that. I think even then it was more closer to 300. But then after the war, they would use the 500 number to compare it to the number of food trucks going in afterwards. So when they were only going in like 50 or 70 or 100 trucks in a day during the war, they would compare that to the 500 number, which included mostly not food, and then they would make it look basically like every Palestinian was getting like a fifth or less than that of the food that they needed, which would imply that that's why I think famine is imminent was a line that I first read in like October 16th or something. And it was a lot of it was based on that assumption that just Israel was not allowing enough, like even a fifth of the amount of food that they need. But now that the war's over and the number of like malnutrition related deaths never got close to what would be needed for like the definition of a famine even by the IPC, then it looks like that was just completely overstated, and they were just, and that was like just poor data that is contradicted by the UN's own numbers.
Well, then I'm curious, like when people are using what you might call overblown or hyperbolic numbers to define things like a famine or a genocide, like what about the Israel-Palestine conflict is unique in such a way that like they would be willing to jump to conclusions that you think might be preemptive compared to any other similar conflict? Like, why is this the one where you think the facts are being obfuscated in such a way that the international communities would say, it's a genocide, but only because I'm basing it off data that is apparently misreported or overblown?
I mean, I can't speak to every single human rights org or like the UN, but I can speak to some parts of it maybe. With the UN, it's easier to explain because like, what is the UN? The UN is just all the countries like voting on things, like to put it in the most crude way possible. But a lot of these countries, or even most of these countries, aren't even democracies, and 50 plus of them are very, very anti-Israel. Like they're part of like a bloc almost, like a voting bloc. So depending on the way that the Human Rights Council works and the way that countries are cycled in and out, we had a period, I think, not less than 10 years ago when Iran was heading parts of the Human Rights Council. Like, why? That doesn't make any sense at all. Like, what position do they have to comment on the human rights of any country, really, given what they do? Like, to their own people, let alone other countries. But so when the UN Special Commission that does a lot of these reports on Israel-Palestine was appointed, it was a particular time when the anti-Israel voting bloc was just like quite big, and they gave them like a really, really broad mandate, much more than any other human rights inquiry has into any conflict, to talk about to do reports on Israel-Palestine, an indefinite mandate, which also doesn't seem to happen for other Human Rights Council appointees. And then they appointed 3 people, one of whom went on a podcast to talk about how he believes that Jews control this, to complain about Jewish control of social media. Another person who was supposed to be like an impartial judge reporting human rights in the region was a BDS activist. So I can see there where just like there are voting blocks that are just very against Israel, like usually in the Middle East, and they can get together and use the UN as a kind of weapon against Israel, and countries that don't need the UN as much, like America and all that, just don't really apply the same.
I'm willing to believe there's like bias in such places with the UN, but like when I'm looking at like, you know, the international community, like all of them combined, like is there such a like, to me it does sound almost like, you know, schizo conspiracy, like everyone just hates Israel so much that's why they're willing to accept not as credible facts and evidence as to whether or not this necessitates a genocide, right? Like, is this the case with literally every single organization that's come to that conclusion, or like, because the UN is like plausible to me, but it can't be. You know, the more organizations that declare it, and then I start to say, well, now I don't know. Like, it seems.
Well, think about where the UN gets this information from. Right, that matters as well. Like, it's not just. I don't think you can just explain it because of like anti-Semitism and like the Muslim voting bloc. I think that explains part of it, like a good part of it. But it's also the fact that the amount of information that's allowed to come out of Gaza comes from citizens in Gaza who live in a closed society where Hamas still dominates, and the IDF whose their information is like military intelligence, right? So they're not going to share that stuff with just like with random international like lawyers and things like that. Like, that's not really, no military would do that like in the middle of a war. They might do it afterwards in a trial, but they're not going to do that right in the middle of the fighting, especially if one of the people writing a report is like a BDS activist or has been. Like, yeah, of course they wouldn't do that. But the information is actually quite limited. So although there's loads and loads of different reports, the information pool that they're drawing from is actually fairly small. So when they want to talk about famine, for example, they might do analyses where they sample different communities in Gaza. They talk to families. They get like measurements of like arm circumference or child malnutrition, and they get these numbers. But it wouldn't be the first time that a population has given inaccurate information or is drawn from inaccurate samples to make broader conclusions because of like the closed society that people in there live in. Because if you are living in Gaza in this war and you tell human rights organizations something that Hamas doesn't want you to hear, doesn't want them to hear, then you're in trouble. You're fucked. So there's all incentives on the other side, right? Because Hamas controls a lot of the economy in Gaza, and they control a portion of the aid as well. So, like, they're the government. So yeah, you are in a position where the information that each of these orgs is getting is quite limited. So I don't think it's like this really broad body that's just getting like, that's just all coming independently to different conclusions. I think they're just drawing from a very small sample of information. And the way that Hamas operates is, I think they've made it a big part of their strategy to utilize the humanitarian situation to their benefit. And in some cases, I think that's meant report everyone who dies as an innocent civilian. So it doesn't matter if it's the UN or Human Rights Watch or Amnesty, whoever calls that person, they're all going to get the same answer. It's not like they're going to betray like Hamas for a different one organization over another, right?
Well, yeah, but then my question is like, then what sources do you trust if it seems like you're incredibly skeptical of numbers that are being used by these like organizations? Like, let me try to present this like as a layman. I'll see some news article and it says like, oh, based on the IPC, 600,000 people are in catastrophic food insecurity. I say, well, that sounds awful. That sounds like we're on the verge of a famine.
Yeah.
And then you go at in that and you're say, I'm skeptical of this, or you're just like, let me make sure this is right. The IDF says this, the Gazan Authority says this. I question based on the history of the Gazan Authority, or like who are you trusting in order to come to these more skeptical or rejecting the claims that are made by some of these organizations, and like why should you trust them over other organizations?
In some cases, sadly enough, you can just use the UN's own data. Like, there's been a few times where, say, with aid trucks, there are two big organizations that would count aid trucks going in daily, right? One was UNRWA, the refugee association that is UN funded and is largely made up of local workers in Gaza. And then there's also COGAT, which is the Israeli body for aid to the Palestinian territories. And they would publish daily numbers for how many trucks are entering the Gaza Strip. UNRWA's numbers were lower for a good long period. They were much lower than COGAT's. So COGAT would say 120 trucks went in today. UNRWA would say 30 or 40. And UN bodies, because UNRWA is the UN, or Amnesty or wherever else, would say that they would use UNRWA's numbers. But I only need to look at UNRWA's own website to this day, which says we are only accounting for ones where our workers are able to log the trucks. We do not talk for every single truck that goes into Gaza. Our numbers are incomplete, and they will update in the future when we get more data. So UNRWA admits that their data is incomplete. COGAT is the Israeli side. So they're literally, and Israel's the one that approves trucks going in to the Gaza. So like they're the ones who would have the full numbers, and UNRWA were not. And so I see this, like, I can even show you if you want, but like there's an Amnesty graph in their report on the genocide where they show you the discrepancy between UNRWA and COGAT. And UNRWA have much lower numbers of monthly trucks going in than COGAT. But then if you look at UNRWA's website today, now that it's been retroactively updated, they're back up to numbers that are closer to COGAT's. So there's a thing going on where UNRWA will like, and you can have that situation happening even when no one's being biased, right? UNRWA will just be able to count less trucks because they are only a portion of the aid distributors in Gaza. So they put that number out. They're a UN org, so people believe them and say that's like the best number we should use for truck numbers. We're not going to trust like just one state over another, Israel over Hamas. So they'll put that number out, but then the report goes out, the outrage comes in, the newspaper headlines come in, and then a month later, UNRWA gets more data. They update their data page, and it actually turns out that COGAT's numbers were more or less correct, or maybe a bit higher than UNRWA's at the end, but still closer. But then that's it. The damage is done. Then we just move on to the next cycle and the next one. This happened for like a year and a half or 2 years. That's one. Again, that's like one example. There's plenty of other ones, and I can give you sources if you don't.
Okay, like I guess there's like, to back up, because we keep getting into specifics that I can't verify. I'm not saying you're lying to me, by the way. I'm just saying like clearly there is what I'm hearing is there are more uncertainties than are otherwise being portrayed by some of these communities. But again, as a layman, when I look at this and I say, okay, I hear the statements from the government that shows that Israel has an intention to wipe these people off of this land, regardless of whether or not that's like, literally killing all of them. Like, you'd agree that if every Palestinian moved to like Libya tomorrow, like Israel wouldn't follow them and kill them, right? Like even if that was like, somehow internationally viable, like that's not what they want. They don't want to literally kill every single Palestinian. It's, I want these people not to exist on the land that we feel is rightfully ours, and we want to do everything we can to acquire that, right?
Does Israel believe that Gaza is rightfully theirs?
That's my understanding, unless you have a correction.
Religiously, that's almost definitely not the case. As far as I know, there's at the very least like some Talmudic or whatever maps will include Gaza and other ones won't. No, I don't think Israel wants to own Gaza. I don't think they actually care for that so much. So obviously the extremists do, but as a majority, no.
Well, when you say the extremists do, the people,
not the government. No, I don't.
No?
Parts of the government. I think maybe Ben-Gvir and Smotrich want it, but they are voting. They're like a block of two parties that make up like 10% of the vote in Israel. But no, the majority of Israel doesn't want to own Gaza. They just want Gaza to not be a threat to them anymore. That's like the general opinion in Israel. Obviously, some believe that they can achieve that by getting them all to run away. But I think the more realistic ones, and I think Netanyahu is probably more realistic than his counterparts in this sense. I think they know it's just not going to happen. They'll talk about Libya or like whatever African country they spoke about, but at the end of the day, I think they're aware that you're not getting 2 million people to leave Gaza. I think maybe 100,000 have left in the last 2 years, if even that, and that was to go to Egypt, and they paid to go there. Like Egypt charged them extortionate fees, and they had, as I think a lot of them had family there, and they were. A lot of them were people were saying that they were planning on leaving anyway. Like so, yeah. There's not. Yeah, Israel, like they left Gaza in 2005. Like they pulled their settlers out of Gaza. They didn't pull their settlers all the way out of the West Bank, because the West Bank is where a lot of the religious like holy sites and all that shit are, where they call it Judea, Samaria, and all that. But Gaza is less important to them as like territory ideologically.
Maybe I kind of focus on like a too specific a claim of they want this land. Obviously, they want the people there to not be there so that the violence stops in their eyes, right? So whether or not that means, oh, Gaza is part of Israel proper and we have always deserved it, is kind of different from the question of, do we want to kick these people off this land so that rocket attacks stop, or that Hamas doesn't have so much territory right next to us? Like I guess that's kind of not as important as whether or not they really want the land there. It appears to be like, we want to clear this place off, whether or not we achieve that through war, whether or not we achieve that through financial means, whether or not we achieve that through settlements. Like that's the intention though, right?
When you say that's the intention, are you saying that like the government is like pursuing this seriously? Like they're sitting there thinking, okay, how do we get 2 million people out of Gaza? Or are you thinking that's like,
yeah, I mean, especially ever since Trump got in office, it seems to me that like the major plans and what he's kind of greenlighting is like this complete transformation of what is like the Trump Gaza, right? Like
yeah, but at the end of the day, maybe something changed. Didn't that ultimate Gaza peace plan that Trump put forward, which I hate by the way, but like didn't that plan rule out ethnic cleansing of Gaza?
I'm not sure to the extent of which it ruled it out. It seemed to be that there's a lot of displacement happening and not a lot of
wait. When you say displacement, the
back.
Displacement's happening within Gaza, right?
My understanding was they're being kicked out of Gaza. But again, it's been like a year and a half since I read it though.
No, I don't. So the people who have left Gaza since October 7th, I think it was about 100,000 of them, very early in the war, went to Egypt. And they were being charged, but they paid to go to Egypt. Like they went through the Rafah crossing, and Egypt charged them like really like scummy extortionate fees to let them out, and then they closed it. No, I don't think I don't think like Israel's been kicking people out of Gaza.
No, I don't know if they have been. The question is like what the plan was.
No, the only plan I saw come up was and how much of a plan it was, because like you get this weird dynamic where Netanyahu will say that we spoke to Libya about them absorbing this many people or whatever, but then Libya will say, oh yeah, we never said anything like that. What are you talking about? So yeah, but then I don't know. Like, are we seriously thinking that? Like, I would be quite surprised. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think it's impossible, but like, I would be quite surprised if you, at any point in the next 5-10 years, started to see like Libyan boats pulling like hundreds of thousands of people out of Gaza, and like Israel signing off on this. As far as the displacements that have happened in Gaza, mostly the displacement has been almost all of it's been internal, as in like they bombed the north, they sent people south, then they bombed the south, sending people north, and now they've gone they've started occupying the eastern half of Gaza, and they've pushed people west. But as far as like any serious plan to think that 2 million or even anything close to them are going to leave the Gaza Strip for good, I don't think that's being pursued as like serious policy right now.
Okay, well then, if that's the case, my question. Well, no. Again, like I'm the least well read on this. Seems to be what I'm hearing and seeing from various headlines and articles I read. But like, let's say this blows over and there's some sort of like not reconciliation, but like, all right, the ceasefire exists to an extent, and we go to pre-October 7th conditions. What does Gaza look like then, if that's the case?
Are you asking me what I think is going to happen, or what should happen?
Based on what you've just said of like what Israel's intentions are, what do you think is going to happen?
Again, I think it's probably worth pulling back and just thinking about like, for most Israelis, not like for the extremists or whatever, but like for most Israelis who have politically fluctuated a lot in the last 20 years, they went from 2 states to this, right? Like in 20 years. What do they want? Like, I don't think they care what happens to Gaza so long as Gaza doesn't attack them. I think that's where most of them are at. Like if Hamas's strategy had been to not fire a single shot at Israel for 5-10 years, then Israeli leftists who advocate for two states or whatever, they would come back onto the political scene like immediately. They would easily gain support, and the Netanyahu blockade, whatever Ben Gvir Smotrich types would go politically extinct. Like they would not have a leg to stand on. I think what people miss is that they try to ascribe like other motives to be the primary one, like they want it for religious reasons, or they want it for ideological reasons, or they want it for racist reasons. No, generally, like it seems to be, given how Israel's made peace with other countries, it seems to be that if they're not attacked, then they're happy to let, if they feel safe with it, they're happy to let territory go.
Well, yeah, but I think that that's like presupposing something, which is like, yeah, okay, maybe they don't just like want Gaza for some like obscure ideological reason, but they necessitate that they are going to keep getting attacked with the Gazans here, right? It's like, oh, well, if they just didn't attack, but they know they will be, therefore we have to move forward with the knowledge that that is how Israel views it. Not as, well, as long as they don't attack, like then we won't do anything. But it's like, okay, but they have kind of accepted the presupposition that they are going to be attacked from Gaza, right? So
yeah,
like, then
okay, so this is where we're going to come back to the earlier part of our conversation when we were talking about what needs to change. And I think I gave a pretty long spiel about what needs to change on the Israeli side and the Western side. This is also where this conflict can't end without changes in the Palestinian side as well. And I think this is probably where a lot of the Western people tend to lose me, because it's like, oh, they're the underdogs, like they're responding to rough conditions or like horrible situation. But at the end of the day, Hamas's strategy failed. The dominant Palestinian way, ever since 48, has always been a failure. They've like every time they've tried like these strategies of like armed resistance, it's always been a failure. Every time they've struggled to distinguish between whether or not they want a state in the 67 borders and to recognize Israel, or whether or not they want to fight for all of it, where they want their attacks to be against settlers or against Israeli citizens in Israel proper. Like this is where the Palestinian side needs to change as well, and where their supporters need to change, because I don't think this conflict can end with just the Israeli side having their minds shifted towards two states. You're going to also need to change the consensus, at least amongst some of the backers of Hamas, whether it's like Turkey or Qatar, or within Hamas, or within Western supporters who Hamas also pays attention to. This idea that Hamas's strategy has brought anything other than destruction, shit, and war, whatever, like that cycle is going to continue. If Israel elects the most left-wing government on earth that they've ever had tomorrow, but Hamas are still in Gaza, and Hamas still gets control over Gaza and still has a level of freedom of governance in Gaza, they're going to attack again. And every Israeli right-winger is going to come back out and say, hey, we told you so, you left-wing fucking soy lib fucks. We're going back to blockades. We're going back to security. We're going back to bombs. Fuck you. And then the left wingers lose the argument. Do you disagree with anything I've said there? Or?
Well, you said a lot. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily know for sure whether or not I can like say, well, factually you're wrong, or I disagree. But like, yeah, it does seem to be the case that Hamas is committed to a greater plan of like conquering Israeli territory than just we exist and we don't hurt each other. But again, I guess this is getting more into the like, how you move forward here. When I'm still kind of stuck on like the genocide thing and like how it's viewed from the Western perspective. Like the whole reason I wanted to have this conversation was I hear all these points from the international communities, from the pro-Palestinian side, and it seems to be the case that what Israel is doing is unjustified. And when I talk to people, even people that were more amicable toward Israel, like post October 7th, like immediately, even now they'll say, well, Israel's gone too far, XYZ reasons. The Netanyahu government is so right-wing and crazy, and they need to be displaced or voted out. And so when I say, okay, like, is it a genocide? And you say like, well, I'm not sure I can trust, these sort of numbers, or these things are obfuscated or overblown. Okay, let's say that's the case. What then is what is Israel doing that isn't proper? I mean, like
that isn't what? Sorry,
you feel like they've done war. What are they doing that isn't proper? And like, what like are they doing war crimes? Like, is it ethnic cleansing? Like, or it seems like they don't want to ethnic cleanse. Like, I'm getting a lot of mixed messages here, and that there's a lot of information being spouted. Again, this is due to the fact that I have not read on this, but like, I'm a bit confused about like, what would you say like the most legitimate criticisms of what the government is doing now, and why is that illegitimate based on the way you've described the Hamas intentions?
Okay, sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I'll just so the list of
No,
things
no,
that Israel's done
you're
that's not
going to
proper.
need
Yeah,
to
yeah.
repeat yourself. I'm
That's
asking
okay.
a lot of
That's okay. That's fine.
circular questions.
Yeah, so things they've done that are like the legitimate criticisms. One is that they again, it's a right wing government, very similar, like akin to Trump's one. You know, like Pete Hegseth, that kind of thing. That
Yeah.
mindset of that, like rules of war are gay and retarded, like those kind of, that is very, very popular in like the upper echelons of like Israeli society, and it's spread across the society as well. Like they voted for people who believe like that kind of shit. So the fact that they have like on paper, like in a classical sense, like you have IDF rules of conduct, which are pretty much like on paper in line with international law. But then you have division commanders, people who are in charge of like 10,000 soldiers, who are settlers, who are telling their soldiers to just go into an area and shoot whoever because they don't dress in uniform anyway, so just spray and pray like that, which is illegal. You're not supposed to do that, right? Or like when you hear about strike decisions being made where a NATO calculation might say that this target is worth like 5 or 10 civilians, it looks like the Israeli conduct is saying something like 30 or 40 or 50 per strike. Like there's a level of proportionality here that I don't think would ever be accepted by any NATO country. This is why Biden withheld a large arms shipment, right? So in that sense, the permissiveness as well, like I think in the whole history of Israel, and this was ages ago, the longest that I think an Israeli soldier has ever been given in jail for murdering a Palestinian, by their rules, murdered, was, I think it was 3 years, maybe even less. That's the longest an Israeli soldier has ever spent in jail for murdering a Palestinian. Of course, you're going to allow, and you got 3,000 soldiers, 300,000 soldiers operating at one time or another, a lot of them being like conscripts. Like you're going to, and you have that kind of incentive structure, of course, people who want to commit crimes are going to commit crimes. And doing it at the upper levels as well is like really, really scary. And it's something that like any NATO or any Western ally shouldn't stand for. So what should be done about that? Again, like, I mean, I wish we had a Democrat in power, because Biden was president at a time when, for the first time, I think ever in American history, Democratic sympathy for Palestinians exceeded sympathy for Israelis. That never happened before. And that only increased throughout Biden's presidency. So he started doing things that American presidents have never done before, sanctioning settlers, even actually sanctioning part of, I think there was like one military unit in the West Bank that was behaving improperly, let's say, committing crimes against Palestinians, and they were disbanded by the. So like if Biden could have had more push there, and a second Democrat administration by someone to the left of Biden, like Kamala Harris, could have gone further with that, that would have been a very welcome thing. That should have happened. As for the peace plan in Gaza,
give me a sec though, because based on some of the things you said, so say there are generals or politicians with command over tens of thousands of people that are prescribing things that to me sound like, essentially like the greatest atrocities that we've seen in history. Not like these are the specific ones, but like are akin to, where it's like, hey, just go kill anyone, right? At what point does that stop being like individualistic on, oh, well, this guy who's in charge of this many people did that and that's bad, versus it seems to me that there's a greater project within the government or the military to do these horrible things. And that's why so many organizations are calling it this like a genocide or ethnic cleansing or like systemic war crimes, right?
Well, the interesting thing is that I don't think I've seen human rights organizations use that argument that I made, because they try to argue that it's
Are they? Oh, sorry. I thought
because they try to argue that it's like a top-down decision-making thing, or they try to argue that it's because of the aid distribution, or like it varies. But like what I'm saying points more to maybe not so much like genocide with like your special intent, but more a system of just not really giving a fuck. I think like ambivalence to war crimes is very different from actually going out there and seeking to massacre and like murder people for its own sake. Like I think there's a difference between someone saying like, oh, there's a gunshot coming from this building, we've got like, okay, well, blow up the building. Like I think there's a difference between that and saying and like genocides where civilians are rounded up, they're bound, and then they're just shot in the head when they're literally posing no threat at all. There's like one by one. I think like cutting corners in war and committing crimes is very different from that.
Yeah, I want to stop you there because that is interesting to me. It's like, yes, obviously, if you were to take something like, all right, where they're rounding up every Palestinian and just, killing all of them in a pit or somewhere, like this would be like the most unambiguous, like this is like as bad as the worst genocide we've ever documented in history. So clearly this is that. But when you're talking about this like ambivalence where the government or the military leaders or whoever are making these decisions or ignoring these violations are saying, I care so little about this population that I'm willing to ignore what I guess you use numbers that are like, 1.5 times as many casualties, twice as many casualties as like what would normally be allowed in these situations. Like if the ultimate conclusion is this population of people is irrelevant to me and like that I don't view them as like the same kind of humans as I view my own people, like at what point does that cross the line of like, all right, this might as well be considered the genocide if we're killing these people? Or is it specifically because you think that G word conflates or points to the kind of things you talked about of rounding people up, where it's like, well, we shouldn't use that because now we are ascribing those moral prescriptions to it? Can you make that distinction, or do you get what I'm asking?
Yeah, but again, it's just a question of like, it's a question of legality almost. Like the same way that we assess murder, right? Like murder by killing someone through negligence, or killing someone out of passion, or killing someone out of carelessness is different from killing someone with cold-blooded intent. We do this with crime all the time. Like intent matters, and since dolo specialis has been such a central feature of genocide case law forever, basically. Like, yeah, I think of course, why wouldn't you have that separation if that's kind of been a feature of the law for so long?
Well, it's kind of like the same as like the apartheid thing we're saying, where it's like, to me, it doesn't. I guess maybe if there's some like international prescription that happens as soon as you say, oh, it's the G word has happened, it's genocide, we have to do this now. Okay, maybe that's when the dolo specialis comes in. But for me, it's like, okay, on one hand, I've got people rounding them up and shooting them into a ditch somewhere, and that's obviously terrible. And on the other hand, I have people bombing a building. Maybe there's a Hamas militant in it, and they know that 100 civilians are going to die when they do this because they don't care. They're apathetic to those deaths. Then it's like, well, ultimately, this is like a distinction without a difference. Like the utilitarian consequences, a bunch of civilians who don't need to die are dying because the people don't care that it's happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
You keep saying distinction without a difference. I don't think you necessarily believe that. If the Israeli government was like, I want to kill Palestinians, we're not talking about Hamas, just Palestinians, and he communicates that to the war cabinet and they send it down to the IDF, would there be 70,000 dead in 2 years or 700,000 dead in 2 years?
Right. So obviously, I recognize the difference of like, yeah, if the an explicit intention was kill every Gazan, you're
not
gonna
even
see
kill
a
every
bigger
Gazan, but just kill them, right? I can't remember the way that the initial Nazi communiques were when they were sending people into Poland, but it was like you go into a village and you kill all the inhabitants, you kill the inhabitants, right? Or like you go into an area, the soldiers might like stand, but this population like don't take prisoners and things like that. Like it's very like it doesn't have to be kill them all, but it has to be like it's giving a broad mandate to just like kill civilians, like generally, not like we're going to aim for terrorists and however many civilians come along with it, fuck them. Like it's not like that, but it's that's why I think it's different. That's why given Israel's like firepower, like yeah, of course,
to this.
Yeah, that's why the intent matters as well, because you're saying it's a distinction without a difference. I think an Israel that wants to commit genocide is not killing 70,000 people in 2 years with their firepower. They're not spending the amount of money that they did on precision weapons and like guided missiles and the like millions of phone calls and text messages and like staying on the phone with someone for 2 hours to make sure they've cleared a building before they bomb it. They're not doing any of that. They're just going to use probably like a fifth of the weight of tons of bombs and just sweep the place, and that's it. Boom, done. And then they've got
right. Like I'm saying, obviously there's a degree to this that could be severely worse. So sorry, when I say distinction without a difference, I don't mean this is the worst it could possibly be. What I'm saying is that a level of negligence that you've described in their actions are akin to like essentially saying, yeah, this population is irrelevant to me. Casualties are irrelevant to me. I mean, I've heard the statements of, like how many Palestinians is like one Israeli life worth, right? And it's like, okay, like if you're going to treat this with a level of negligence that caused this amount of excess death, regardless of if the intent is I want to kill every Palestinian, it seems that there is a degree of excess death and negligence that is causing just ethnic cleansing by virtue of how you're doing it.
But we have other words for those things. We have war crimes. We have I don't doubt that some unit somewhere in a year or two's time will have come out to have committed crimes against humanity. Like we have other words for these things. So I don't know why everyone has to like rush to the worst one, or to the one that hasn't really been applied to this kind of behavior like in the past. Like usually the term genocide has been limited. Like the Bosnian War, they restricted it to Srebrenica, not to the entire. Yeah.
So I know like vaguely about the whole Kosovo, Albania, Serbia thing, but like when you say they restricted it, how do you mean?
As in, like, I think it was the European Court that said the whole war was a war of genocide, and the ICTY, the International Tribunal, said that the Srebrenica massacre itself, that 3-day massacre of like 7 or 8,000 people, that was genocide, but the general war campaign was not. That's why I think there was never really a conclusion on whether or not like Milosevic had committed genocide, right? Or whether it's like the
Really? I thought that
Kristich and
was. I mean,
Mladic.
maybe I all my friends and knowledge from this comes from people that are Albanian and Kosovian. I don't even know.
Kosovar.
Kosovar. Yeah, I should know that. I'm fucking stupid. They told me this. But I thought it was like pretty unambiguous that Milosevic was genocidal.
Not legal.
I mean,
not legally. He was never found. There was no
not
final
legally.
judgment. There was because he died, but also because like even after he died, like there was they had plenty of proof of the intent when it came to Mladic and Kristich, I think it was, the generals who were talking about like getting digging equipment to come in to dig the holes, and talking about how they're gonna avenge the Serbs for what the Turks did to us. Kosovars aren't Turks, but you know they were.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, Milosevic was not legally found to have committed committed genocide.
So yeah, if he wasn't legally found, I guess that's like kind of more to like my question originally, where it's like, okay, like clearly some degree to this was genocide, where they're like going out and wiping out civilian populations, and we can't prove that the intent, enough intent to show that the guy who orchestrated this did it, and only a few thousand people died, I think, overall in this genocide. It wasn't like a complete wipeout, but like, so then what's the point of saying it is or isn't there, right? Like that, and like if anyone were to come up to me and say the Bosnian genocide, and I would be like, well, you're just talking about this region, right? I would say like, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. I know exactly the consequences of what you're talking about. And like, if I were to apply this to Israel-Palestine, I wouldn't have this level of like scrutiny for the people saying it. Hey, it's a genocide. It's like, yep, no, pretty much. I understand why you're saying it and the degree to which you mean that, unless they're prescribing this as like Israel wants to kill every Gazan, which I don't think most people use that term to mean that, but maybe you're having
no, it doesn't have to mean they want to kill every Gazan. It's to have like a special intent, like a specific intent with an action to like, as in, like, I think the standard they use is the only reasonable interpretation of what they're doing is to achieve just killing this national group, right? So that's why. So if another reasonable interpretation is they find Hamas like to be perfidious and they don't want their soldiers to hesitate, so they tell them not to hesitate, that wouldn't be like that's another reasonable interpretation, right? Like, it doesn't have to be a good interpretation, but it can be like, you can interpret it to be that way, and that's where their mind was going. But like, if we're talking about taking what they're doing and like having that negligent attitude to war crimes and saying, well, like that might as well be genocide, then well, you can do that if you want, and I wouldn't be surprised if the ICJ ends up doing that, honestly, given what I've read about their previous statements on it. But so even if they decide that, though, and we decide that the genocide is going to broaden to include that negligence for civilian death that at a systematic level, well then, okay, but then you're also including so many acts that we used to previously not call genocide into that. Then everyone in World War II committed genocide, right? Britain did when they bombed Hamburg and Dresden. Fucking Hamas, every Hamas attack ever has been genocidal. Most of Fatah and what they've done with their attacks would have been genocidal. Like every Assad genocidal, maybe even HTS at points might have been genocidal. ISIS, well, obviously they did commit genocide. Hezbollah, definitely genocidal. Like you're broadening it to include absolutely
on
everyone.
Like the Hamas
right?
part, but like I think even the first example, I might take issue with the idea that like, oh, what we did in Hamburg, like it wasn't like I don't even know like to what extent war crimes were defined back in World War II, but like these kind of like total war campaigns of bombing entire countries was just like the basis of what every country did in every single war at that point, right? Like that's what every country was doing to each other, which I think is not as comparable as to say like, you know, I might even agree Hamas's actions in Israel are genocidal, especially based on their charter of we want to literally wipe these people out and kick them off their land, right? Like, but the Hamburg thing I think is a pretty big difference.
Not exactly. What they called it strategic bombings. Like those civilian bombings, the firebombing, they were controversial at the time. Even there was hesitancy before doing it. I think it was the Soviets in the case of Dresden that were like literally like they were begging for it to happen because they didn't want to face, like they wanted to soften the ground before going in. And I think at the end of the war, Churchill, when he was literally thanking like every fucking part of the military for their contribution to the war effort, he left out Bomber Command because it was so controversial. So no, that did stand out at the time as well. And with the stuff that they were saying, like this is literally an event where they unloaded on only a few thousand tons of bombs, not that many, but they killed like 25,000 people in like 2 days. Like it was insane. And they targeted the center, even though all the military factories and everything were outside the city. So, and they believed that terrorizing the civilian population would push them against the Nazis, would demoralize them. Like, so they believed they were targeting civilians, right? So,
Yeah.
But
what
again,
I'm saying is
the
this
problem
isn't
is
unique
that
to like the bombing of Hamburg or Dresden. And yeah, you can say it was more controversial at the time, but like, yeah, it just as much as like dropping the nukes on Japan, as much as firebombing of Tokyo, like I'm trying to think of like what would make that specific Hamburg or Dresden unique to compared to like every other bombing campaign in
But
that
that's the thing
entire
is that
era.
like but then even today though when we talk about the Middle East, then suddenly very little becomes unique. You can look at what Trump was doing in Trump 1, where he was relaxing rules of engagement in Afghanistan, and where you had American generals saying like, oh yeah, these sand words, all these sand N words, they only understand force, and I'm going to show them force. Did that person commit genocide when they were like allowing the use of landmines, which they knew would kill civilians, or relaxing rules of engagement and airstrikes, which
I'm not saying that
doubled the
every
civilian
war
death toll?
crime is a genocide, and
Hmm.
also like I would say that Trump very clearly like expressed genocidal intent when he says like, "Hey, you know, I'm about to wipe out an entire civilization," but
Yeah.
like the follow through on that and well, the consequences afterwards, I think, are part of that, obviously. So like again, I don't know if this is necessarily making it too broad because you're saying there's a broader and consequential result that is being caused by a complete systemic governmental ignorance of war crimes, and kind of like forcefully moving this population versus like, hey, every time you do a war crime and are ignorant about it, that's a genocide. I think like the scale matters, how widespread it is matters, and like yeah, you can point to certain examples, but I don't necessarily think that diminishes the definition such that it's useless.
I think it no, it might not make it useless, but it does dilute it. It 100% dilutes it. It would include, like I said, it would include Saudi Arabia, it would include the Houthis, it would include Hamas, Hezbollah, it would include the Syrians, it
Do
would include
people
like
not call
five
it
different
Saudi
factions.
Arabia?
And
Well, this might be true. Again, I'm not super informed of this. Like, don't people call it like the genocide of Yemeni by the Saudi
well, the
Arabians? Isn't
IPC
that
didn't actually even call it a famine in Yemen. Interestingly, they I think like 80,000 kids died. The UN by the IPC, the same people who said there was a famine in Gaza, didn't say there was one in Yemen. Separate
okay?
story, but
I mean, based on what again, uninformed. Based on what I hear from both of those, they both sound like, and one is severely worse. The Yemenis, the death toll in Yemen. Why do you think that distinction exists again? Is it because of this? Like, is it just Israel bias? Is it because the organizations are using the numbers from the UN that has the Israel bias? Like, go back to that question. Like, why is there that?
I think in that case, the IPC was making maybe a similar mistake that UNICEF made in the 90s. There was a time in the 90s when most people thought that the sanctions on Iraq had killed like 500,000 Iraqis through starvation because of similar methodologies with interviewing families on child mortality and malnutrition. It turned out that the data was just being inflated because of like the directions of Saddam Hussein's government, and retroactively all that. Since people got access to Iraqi documents and they found out the life expectancy hadn't changed all that much at all, then it. But to this day, I don't know if you've ever heard people tell you this. Like, I know there are a few lefties online who still believe this, that like the U.S. sanctions or the international sanctions on Iraq killed like 1 million or 500,000 Iraqis. It wasn't true. It didn't happen. Like, but
I don't know about the sanctions. I just know about
but
like
yeah,
the
I think
death
I
toll
think it's a similar
total.
thing where you've got a closed society, a very limited access to information, and a situation where you just have like, yeah, it does seem to be the case that humanitarians, I don't even necessarily fault them for this. Like they have to say something. Like they have to go with whatever the best that they've got. But it seems that the best that they've got, I don't know if it was influenced by Hamas or the field workers on the ground were being biased, or like they were maybe they only had access to clinics, and clinics are going to overrepresent people who are malnourished, and they applied that to the broader population. Like there's a few like hints of to what happened there, but like I have not really gone too deep into why I think that bias exists in every part of the international organizations. I've just read enough of the reports to know that it does exist. That's all I can tell you, honestly.
Right, because like when I hear that, it's like okay, there's at least some bias. I'm even willing to accept that, but like I guess is your this is my perception of what you believe, and tell me if this is
Mhm.
wrong. That it's like, I mean, or if you take like the worst thing that like a chatter might say, it's like, oh, Zogbox is like, saying like he trusts Israel over every international community. But like, is it more that you see flaws in their analysis and therefore you're more skeptical of it, or that kind of like like waiting for that criteria to be met, and then you're like, okay, now I'll call this a genocide because I haven't seen definitive proof of X.
Yeah, well, I mean, I see them making the same mistakes over and over again, and I see Hamas, an organization that is amazing at propaganda and terrible at fighting war. So they know that they can. I see Hamas basically exploiting the methods of these like rights organizations. That's probably what I'd put it down to more than anything else. Uh,
They're
like
exploiting, like
I'll give you a
they're
very
they're
clear
reporting
example
it in
of it.
such a way they know that the rights
Yes,
organizations will
yes,
misinterpret.
yes.
Okay.
We know, like, so there's a cycle that happens ever since the first war with Israel and Hamas in 2008. Hamas will hide their deaths. They'll hide their losses. They'll say they're civilians. They'll tell people to say they're civilians. And then the rights organizations, Goldstone Report was an example of this, will go by this standard, which I think is a good standard if you're a rights organization, is they'll say, if there is doubt, they're a civilian. If we don't know what their status is, we're going to say civilian until we're shown otherwise.
Yeah, because
So
assuming the opposite would be like extra liberal with the
yeah, of course,
definition, I'm
yeah,
guessing.
so Hamas, all they have to do is raise the doubt. They can just, well, we will just fight out of uniform. We'll just integrate our civilian with our military institutions. The IDF are not going to share their intelligence with people from outside of their country. Like they're not going to show they're working to like a UN reporter. So then the UN basically has the best information they can get. And then it looks like the IDF targeted a bunch of civilian institutions. I think in the first case it was like police stations, for example. And then it's only a year or two afterwards when Hamas needs to court their own population and remind their own population that they're the ones who are fighting for Palestine and they're the ones who died for Palestine. Then they'll publish their losses, which you can find on their website. And it turns out like the IDF numbers were quite close to Hamas's, usually a bit higher, but not that far off. And that's happened. I've seen this happen by looking at Hamas's own data from for at least like 3 or 4 different conflicts. And it's starting to emerge very slowly now with this one. So, but that's not a human rights organization doing anything wrong. They can't go into Gaza. They can't, they can survey the population, but the population is in a dictatorship, a very brutal dictatorship of Hamas. So they're limited with what they can say to people on the outside. The IDF doesn't want to share intelligence. Human rights orgs have the best information they can get, which is doubt. So they're going to assume civilians. And then a year and a half later, when all the press has died down, Hamas actually admits their losses and no one cares. I think that's happened since 2008 easily.
I'm going to try to summarize what you said. Tell me if I'm getting something wrong. People who are upset and calling this a genocide are relying on human rights organizations. Human rights organizations are relying on numbers that are with a high level of uncertainty because they're coming from a confined and war zone that has not a lot of information coming out that might have misrepresentation in it, and therefore they are being very liberal, and a lot of bad things and war crimes and stuff could be happening there, but the level to which it meets the genocide might be obfuscated by the fact that these facts are very muddy. And therefore, people who are calling it a genocide are basically in a more of a moral gray area, or like a level of uncertainty that isn't as confirmed as you think it is.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. And I would probably also add, what was I thinking there? I had like 3 things I wanted to say. Okay, I'll pick one.
Also, I don't have a heart out, but
Yeah.
I'm going to talk to Dylan Burns in like 10, 20-ish minutes. So after this, I kind of want to bring it back to like a way to move forward or call to action. But go ahead.
Okay. Right. So I think a big problem with doing you said like why they're like people call it a genocide because the human rights report said, like, I don't know if that's true. I heard people calling it genocide like when there were still Hamas fighters in Israel. Like I think that word came out really quickly, and I noticed it being used by like the activist groups like for a couple of years before that as well, to just talk about the entire conflict as a permanent and that's been going on for ages. They've always, I feel like that conclusion has been decided before anything happened on October 7th by a lot of people, but I think the problem, and maybe why, again, I don't really talk about this like particular debate that often, but like I think the reason it is an issue is that you get into a situation where if you don't know your enemy, you can't fight it. If you don't know what the problem is, you're not going to have any power over it. And if there's ever any mystery as to why this Free Palestine movement on the college campuses have managed to be the most popular, one of the most, probably the biggest Western social protest movement since BLM, right? They were massive. I think if you want to understand why they were so fucking useless despite being the size that they are, it's because none of them actually cared to look into the details of what was happening, and they didn't know what to ask for. So you have calls for a binational one-state solution, which no one in Palestine has ever in majority wanted. Even a plurality has never wanted it. They start calling for like sanctions and abolishing of Israel, or like unilateral withdrawals from Gaza or the West Bank or Lebanon, or they're talking about arming the resistance groups or defending them. They're like downplaying anti-Hamas protesters who are literally begging Hamas to stop firing rockets from their neighborhoods and hiding underneath them in tunnels, like literally saying this and no one reporting on it. The reason
there's
that
some overlap though, right? I mean, like you at the beginning said, there's some overlap of like you said there's some significant steps that America or Western countries could do to like have specific triggered consequences to actions that Israel takes. And it like I would guess that 90% of protesters don't have like an informed view of like what that exactly looks like, but that's kind of what they're asking for, right? And you seem to say this is probably how you get them to rein in their worst atrocities.
Yeah,
right?
so like I don't fault most of these because I met a lot of these protesters. I went and spoke to them because I was genuinely curious about them in my hometown, and I went to like 2 different cities in Scotland to talk to these people. I don't fault them as human beings. Most of them are like very decent people who have just seen way too much fucking death and too many like dead women and children and all that. Like any human being would look at that and just feel fucking horrified and want it to stop, right? I don't fault them on that level at all. But the thing I fault is the thought leaders, the people who are giving them pamphlets and talking and teaching them about the conflict through this very biased lens, and teaching them about Israel and turning them into a movement that ceases at some point to be a humanitarian movement and just a deaf, dumb, and blind hatred of Israel movement. And then you get into a situation where any improvements that could have been made by the Democratic Party, or any distinction between the Democrats and Biden, between the Democrats and Trump, they get ignored, right? So if it's all genocide, then if it's still going on, if every airstrike that's gone on in Gaza and if people are still dying, we're still going to call it genocide. So what's the difference between Biden and Trump? And then you have this apathy that comes out of it. And then that's
I think that's like the biggest agreement I'll have with you. By the way, I'm not saying like I majorly disagree on everything you've said. Mm-hmm. Mostly it's just like I either agree or don't know. But yeah, the idea that if you call it a genocide, I think this is the strongest argument against it. Then if you're able to say that Trump and Biden and Kamala are complicit in that, then yeah, like, well, then what's the point of voting for them? Are they going to make it even marginally better? Are they going to push towards a better solution? Oh, well, no, because it's both genocide. Therefore, I shouldn't like try to stop Trump, right? Like that's probably the strongest argument I can think of. Like, that's why you shouldn't use the G word if that's.
It's not even. I'm not even saying. Yeah. I'm not even saying this is why you shouldn't use the G word, because again, like, how many people who call it genocide are sitting there looking at UN case law and making that? No, it's a political term. Like it's an activist term, and I've usually had more sympathy with people using activist terms just to communicate a feeling, right? Because what happens is when you see like your 800th fucking video of a dead mother or like a dad holding his dead baby, or whatever, no, of course you're going to want the most, like the strongest word to describe that, to match to that feeling. Because otherwise, like someone trying to say, well, maybe not genocide, maybe more a war crime. Well, then it's suddenly you're like, oh, what? So this isn't that bad. And it becomes like more of a moral argument than anything else. But it's not so much about the G word thing, but it's more just about like understanding like where, just getting a better understanding of the Israel-Palestine conflict in general and over the facts of the situation in general. Because I think what happened with like all of this maximalist language and maximalist perspective is that, yeah, like I said, like, and you were saying as well, I was going to talk about like forgetting that distinction between a party that can actually listen to demands and make differences versus one that can. So Biden, for example, sanctioned settlers for the first time ever from a US president. They hadn't done that before. He withheld weapons, which were resumed on week 1 by Donald Trump, right? There was like 2,000 it was a couple of thousand 2,000-pound bombs and a bunch of 500-pound bombs. They were paused by Biden. They were resumed by Trump. All the sanctions on settlers were removed by Trump. Trump was the one who initially recognized the Golan Heights and the Israeli sovereignty over all of Jerusalem. Famine was never declared by the IPC under Biden. Did you know that? It was only declared under Trump. The GHF, the fucking cataclysmically fucking pathetic, inhumane, murderous fucking aid plan that the United States and the IDF tried to implement in Gaza was a Trump idea. Biden would have never gone with a plan like that, or Harris. Like that was a strictly Trump thing. The Trump peace plan. Trump excludes the PA from any future governorship of Gaza. They only want literally Israeli armed stooges running the strip. Biden wanted the PA involved. Biden tries to be a partner with the PA because the Democrat official position is a two-state solution, and the PA are the legitimate government of Palestine. Trump said no. Trump said the legitimate leaders of Palestine are some fucking gangsters who are taking money from the IDF or from the Israeli state. These differences matter, and the fact that people just overlooked it, and when people just said, "Oh, it's all genocide," because it cheapens that difference, and it cheapens the potential that you have to actually address that difference and work with it. Democrats could have continued to be pushed by a left flank that actually had a coherent critique and a coherent plan. They could have been pushed, as we speak, they could be getting pushed right now to do better things in Gaza and to convince and to push Israel to do better and to punish Israel for not doing better. But they're not, they wanted to boycott Starbucks. You know why Starbucks had boycotted Soypill?
I vaguely remember this. Like what they donated money to Israel. They had Starbucks in Israel. I don't even know what the fuck it was about.
There are 0 Starbucks branches in Israel. The last one was closed in 2003. Starbucks is on the boycott list because an activist group of union workers used their union page with a Starbucks logo to publish a picture of Hamas at the fence on October 7th saying, "We stand with the resistance." And Starbucks sued them for using their branding to support terrorism. That's why Starbucks is on the boycott. It's fucking mental. You have to know what you're talking about to be an effective political movement. I don't know. Fuck. Sorry. I'm not shouting at you.
Well, no, it's okay. I'm not a BDES Starbucks, boycott divest Starbucks person. But okay. Well, here are 2 things I want to say before I go. The first is prescriptions from you, and the second is just kind of like my summary of everything. So the first one would be, you got all these people, not just my chatters. Let's say they're all saying, not they're all. There's some people in here saying, "Oh my God, fucking genocide denialist, Lonerbox," right? Like because you've made this very specific definition. So these people have the energy. They see the death. It's very obviously bad to them. Whether or not that's negligence or war crimes, whether or not you want to call it ethnic cleansing, how do these people get this to stop? I mean, where should this energy be directed to? It seems that, regardless of whether or not we agree on definitions, you absolutely have smoke for the Israeli government for what they're doing. You think they need to be sanctioned in certain ways or held accountable by other governments. So how do we move forward with that as activists in this country, as people who are going to be voting? What should these people be directing their energy towards? Obviously it's not sitting outside Starbucks and telling people not to buy it.
I mean, you can't really do all that much at all now that Trump's the fucking president. I don't know, get a Democrat back in and get them to push things that are actually okay, so push for accountability in the IDF. If America is going to share intelligence as a Western liberal military that abides by the Geneva Conventions with Israel, then Israel needs to do the same. Israel needs to abide by the Geneva Conventions. They need to punish people in their military that don't. America can do it. America's jailed people for 20 years for committing war crimes. Get the IDF to start doing that, and if they don't, then you're going to lose some arms shipments. Fuck you. Settlers, sanction them all. They should all get fucked. Sanction.
Here, wait, pause, because I see where you're going with this. So let's say we have people and then we're voting for the midterms to try to get, MAGA out of power, and you're asking, people are like, "Hey, Gavin Newsom, is this a genocide? Do you think Israel's an evil country?" Should they be kind of pushing for this, what you're saying, hey, will you hold Israel to account for its war crimes? That's what they should be asking of their representatives, or what should the populace be asking of the people they're voting for?
Yeah,
the specific politicians.
To me, the most effective protest movements are ones that have simple and sharp and realistic demands, right? Just give them a few. Just be will you put condition on arming Israel? Will you say, if you're going to get arms, you have to abide by a level of conduct that is in line with the Geneva Conventions or NATO, right? That's a simple demand. That's a very easy one. Are you going to sanction settlers? Are you going to involve the PA in governorship of Gaza? There's a few. Yeah, I can go on all day about things that they could say. Right? They're not going to do it though. They're fucking retarded. Good luck.
Well, that's the thing is like,
But
yeah, most
also,
of the
sorry.
demands
At
I
the end
see
of
is just like, will you completely stop every arms shipper to Israel? I mean, very recently, I think AOC just I don't know if I want to say like caved or capitulated, but like changed her stance on this, right? Where she's just like complete, like I will fund no weapon shipment, even if it's Iron Dome stuff, right? Am I crazy or did that just happen?
I don't know.
That seems to be where the conversation is happening now. But
Okay.
the point is, it's like I think it's like an 80-20 or even like a 90-10, like anti-Israel sentiment in the country. And it's like if that energy and that sentiment exists, like there has to be a realistic thing that can be asked of the people that are going to be elected in the midterms in 2028. And it sounds like it's like, yes, conditional aid is good. Holding Israel to account for war crimes is good. Geneva Convention upholding is good. International law upholding is good. And that I think is a way to move past the like, oh, if you don't call it a genocide, like you're a genocide apologist and you're justifying everything Israel does, which is like, again, if you just look at this conversation, people might have smoke for the things you say, but it's so clear what your intentions are. I don't see how you could obfuscate that as, oh, this guy wants Israel to keep doing what they're doing. So, yeah.
Listen, I don't want to turn you against your audience too much over little old me, buddy.
I am the opposite of audience cap. Every single
Yeah.
person here could be screaming at me for platforming you, and I'd be like, whatever. Like I'm just trying to learn and do the best for what I can. Like it's.
Well, it's a real thing.
I jumped into the middle of this. All right, it's like that fucking in the Looney Tunes with a cat and the dog are in a big cloud of smoke and there's fists coming out of it, and then I stepped into the conversation and I'm getting all the fucking smoke, but I don't know what the hell like how to navigate this and have the best prescriptions, and that's why I'm trying to ask people. I'm like, I should probably talk to more Palestinian activists too, or actually, yeah, like what would you say? Like, are there Palestinian activists that you hold in high regard that say like these people are informed and you should speak to these people and learn about it from their point of view?
Oh yeah, I can give you a list that's like 10 or 20 names long just off the top of my head if you want. Even like actually someone who criticized my views on fucking genocide actually just recently. His name's Beast Process. Again, me and him disagree on a lot, but he's like a very smart person and he's well intentioned and he'll teach you something that's different from what I've told you. So yeah, you should. I would say him. I would say. Again, like that Ahmed Khatib guy, again, different perspective, but he's pretty decent. If you want, like, a lot of these Palestinian politicians would talk to streamers as well. Hanan Ashrawi is someone who has spoken to. She was part of the peace process back in the 90s, and she spoken to a few fairly small creators. She's a really interesting person because she was involved in peace talks through the early 90s as well as the late 90s. She's been involved in a lot, and she still is. She still talks to Israelis about, this or that plan going forward. Who else was
Actually? Oh, wait, hold on. You cut out after forward. Sorry, this is like a tech issue on my end.
Oh no,
after
I was
forward?
just saying. I was saying who else? Who was fuck? There was a name that even the guy that wrote the 100 Years War, Rashid Khalidi, he would talk to people. Yeah.
Oh yeah, maybe I should definitely try to set that up. Oh,
yeah.
also, maybe past that second step 3, I'd be willing to facilitate a debate with you and someone else if that's something you're interested in.
Depends on who.
I don't know. Well, yeah, and I'm sure you've done this a lot. Like again, I'm just now stepping into this after just vaguely understanding it from various sources. Well, here's my summary. Like what I wanted to accomplish, and I'm not going to attribute this to you because I don't think it was accomplished, but not because you didn't do something right, but more of it's just a very messy situation. Like I got a lot of heat when I said things like, I'm anti-Zionist because if Zionism is something that necessitates ethnic cleansing, then I don't think it's justified to do it just because of the atrocities committed by Jews. And people said, well, if you talk to people that are more informed on the situation, I think you wouldn't have that opinion. Do you think there is some... This is going to sound like condescending, but like magical set of facts or words in a certain order that would have me change that opinion?
That Zionism necessitates ethnic cleansing?
If Zionism necessitates ethnic cleansing, then I don't think it's justified, or I am anti-Zionist.
Oh. That's a really... This is why I hate fucking buzzwords, because I have no idea what you mean by Zionism necessitates ethnic cleansing.
By Zionism, I mean like if you go back to the 40s and it's like, wow, Jews sure have been persecuted and killed and driven out of every possible thing, and there might not truly be a safe spot on earth, especially in the wake of the Holocaust. Maybe we do need to give them a homeland. Like that necessarily doesn't not make sense to me. It's like, okay, yeah, like I get why this happened, but now looking at the project today and saying, okay, can you maintain the sentiment that existed in the 80s that probably might not exist so much in the 21st century, to my understanding, without racial quotas, without pushing people off their borders? Like, is that the only way to maintain Israel as a state, and if so, then maybe I think it needs to like radically change.
Okay, so when you say
Not
ethnic cleansing, you mean like forcing people away from one place and somewhere else, right? That's like pushing them off the land.
that, or settlements, or
Okay.
or like war to drive them away, like stuff
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, I don't think Zionism necessitates any of that. If the Arab leaders accept, I don't know when you got to this in the Khalidi book, but like, if the Arabs accepted the partition plan in '47 from the UN, that plan did not entail ethnic cleansing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if they accepted that, the Zionists are, if they want to ethnically cleanse, they're fucked, right? Because there's literally, the Arabs have accepted a state next to them, and they could start a war, but they would be immediately the aggressor.
Oh yeah,
But
I'm not
like,
saying Zionism necessitates ethnic cleansing. I'm saying if it does, then
oh,
that's
if it
I feel
does, like, I mean, if it does, then obviously, yeah. Then I don't know, but it depends on what you mean by ethnic cleansing. So, Zionism, I don't think it ever needed to go to a war where they're literally like going to people's doors and telling them, if you don't leave, we're going to shoot you. Like, I don't think it had to be that. I don't think even the war in Gaza had to happen. Right? I think Zionism could have easily existed with a Palestine existing in Gaza and the West Bank alongside them, and no one would get kicked out ever again. That could have happened, and Zionism would still exist. Israel would still be a Jewish state. If you're talking about like back in the 1800s or the early 1900s, where Zionism involved them buying land from absentee landowners and evicting the tenant farmers who lived there to let Jews in, I don't think Zionism would have existed without that. It needed some of that to fulfill its goal of Jewish.
It's more about like in the current day, like perpetual.
Yeah. Okay. Because we don't have a 100-year war because of bad workers' rights in the fucking 20s. Yeah, I know. Zionism doesn't. Yeah. If Zionism necessitated ethnic cleansing, like what, indefinitely, then yeah, of course it's a bad thing. Yeah. That's a broader historical conversation, but I think maybe one thing that is worth asking you, and we can maybe talk about this another time.
Yeah. If you want to wrap up by asking questions of me, actually, that's fine.
One thing to ask you is, and maybe even your chat, is when you talk about Zionism, there's all these kind of like frameworks, like these themes that come along with it, like a mind map, right? Like, so you think about Zionism. If you read Rashid Khalidi's book, you probably heard about Zionism entails like ethnic cleansing, imperialism, Jewish supremacy, displacement or transfer, like imperialism, settler colonialism, like all these themes come along with it. Why does refuge never get mentioned before anything else? Like, Zionism, even during the 48 war, when like literally one of the goals was to get Arabs out, before any of those goals, the one thing that drove Zionism more than anything else, and this is actually even written in people like Herzl or people before him with Ginsburg and all that, it was refuge. It was about safety. It was about people who believed that as Jews, we are currently on the road in the 1800s of assimilation, where like most Jews believe that if they sort of like give up most of their external Jewishness and they assimilate to become Poles or French or Russians or whatever else, then they will be accepted and they'll be safe. Zionists were the minority who said, no, if assimilating will not help us, we will always be Jews. Modern nationalism is going to fuck us everywhere we go. They were right. The Zionists, they won that argument, okay? And everyone in Europe and everyone in the Arab world proved them correct by fucking Jews, regardless of what those Jews did. And
wait, you said we? Are you Jewish too? Are you a brother?
No, I'm saying this is what they're saying. They're saying,
okay, I was just double checking.
I'm very not Jew. Yeah.
No, all right, that's fine. You're not invited to the cookout then.
I am not. No. Yeah. So that was like, that's where Zionists like, that was their main argument. And had it not been for all the crimes of like the Russian Empire or the Nazis, or had it not also been for every other country basically closing their door on Jews, like a lot of Jews went to America before they went to Israel. But then in 1924-25, they passed the Johnson-Reed Act, which was designed to cap the number of Jews entering the country. And then if you look at the graph of the number of Jews going to Palestine, British Palestine at that time, that's the first time when it starts to really boom. As soon as America closes their doors, then they're like, okay, well, where else are we going to go? Well, I guess there's Israel, there's Palestine. So before anything else, Zionism is a refugee movement. They are people who had nowhere else to go in the world. And throughout the beginning and the middle of the 20th century, progressively, every country closes their doors. The Evian conference in the middle of the fucking Holocaust is basically like, yeah, that's bad, but I don't know. Did they have to come here? Yeah.
I mean,
and then
like
after they saw the camps, I think America made an exception for like a few 100,000 Jews, but generally, Johnson Reed stayed in place. They kept their quotas. Rest of the European countries kept their quotas. There was a pogrom in Poland in 1946 after the war ended where 1,000 Jews were killed. And then so these people had nowhere else to go. And then they go to the Middle East, they go to Palestine, which is the one place where they seem to have any hope of living in some kind of like sense of safety or having, which they believe the only safety they can have is as a nation where they're the majority, because that's like, and this is happening all over Europe as well with like post-empire nationalism is like the new progressive way for persecuted groups to be safe. They go there, and then the Palestinian leadership in the early 20s, the Palestine Congress is headed by a guy, Musa Qasim al-Husseini, who believes in the protocols. He's writing to Churchill about the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which he believes are authentic. And then you've got the head of the Arab Committee, the Haj Amin al-Husseini, I think is his brother or his cousin. He is a Nazi. He's literally recruited by the Nazis to do propaganda and to get Bosniaks in Eastern Europe to take part in the SS. So these are like the leaders of a potential Arab state in Palestine. And the Zionists are kind of thinking, well, I'm not too sure about that. That's quite dangerous to a group that's just been fleeing, right? So they decided that this is the last place we're going to run away to. We've been praying about Jerusalem for like 2,000 years or whatever. So like they plant their flag in the ground. They accept the partition plan in 47, and the Arab leaders say no because they want all of the land to be Palestine. And obviously the Palestinians at the time were just thinking, well, yeah, you guys have suffered a lot, but like why is that our problem? Like why should we give up our problem? Yeah, because they're becoming nationalists as well. And then so yeah, they have a pretty just cause in that sense as well. But again, it's like just causes clashing together. But then after the 48 war and Israel being established, all the Jews in the Arab countries, in Libya, Morocco, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, like all of them are blamed for what happens in 48, and they are persecuted. They're already being persecuted in some places. They're being criminalized. Like Zionist activity is outlawed by Zionist activity. Like in Iraq, it was like if you had a biblical map of the Holy Land, if you possessed a map, you could be convicted of Zionist activity and extorted and jailed. So they get the opportunity when countries open their doors to leave, and pretty much all of them do. Each one of these countries completely empties of their Jewish populations that have lived there for like over 1,000, 2,000 years, and they all go to Israel. Some go to France, some go to America, but most of them go to Israel. And like the question I'd have for you, sorry for the fucking rant, but like the question I would have for you is, why is that particular theme of Zionism, like that, the bigger motivator than anything else, the theme of refuge, why is that just never brought up by anti-Zionists? Like, why is that never mentioned, let alone the thing that kind of drove it in the first place?
I guess, I mean, like, if you want to give like the steelman position of why it's not for the steelman for like the Zionist position is, because this makes them look at the very least a little sympathetic, and like you can't introduce any amount of sympathy to Zionism. But the reason I wouldn't bring it up is like, or I do bring it up, but I'm just like, this doesn't matter to me now, is it doesn't justify the worst parts of the consequences of having established it that way. Even if it might have, again, been a just cause, like you said, like these just cause clashing have led to 80 years plus of conflict. And does that necessarily, like, I don't know why I can't say necessarily today. Does that necessarily mean that like anything that happens after that must take into consideration like Jews need refuge? And I guess the answer is like no. I think it doesn't necessarily come into the conversation for me now, where it's like, yeah, okay, maybe in the 40s this was the worst it had ever been, probably, hopefully will ever get, but that doesn't mean that like now I'm going to take that into consideration of Israel's current actions, of what will happen with Palestine and the West Bank. It's a lot less important to me. That was like the whole thing I brought up at the beginning, where it was like, if Zionism necessitates the actions that Israel is taking now, which it seems to not be, and your prescription is that it doesn't, like it matters a lot less. But yeah.
Okay. But I think that does address, but to the question of anti-Zionism, like obviously anti-Zionism to me is like Israel shouldn't exist at all as a Jewish state. Like, is that what you believe, or?
I don't know if I think that a Jewish state needs to exist anymore. And by that I don't mean like, oh, we need to kick all the Jews out, but like, does any ethno-nationalist state need to exist? Like, does Japan need to remain fully Japanese? Does Germany need to remain fully German? I don't think so.
Okay, so you're walking right into the discussion that I thought we were going to have. So this is like the most
Oh,
interesting thing
maybe.
to me. Fuck. Okay, again, you can tell
That's
me when
okay.
there's a
Well,
hard out, by
Dylan
the
hasn't
way.
replied yet, so you
Okay,
got some
okay.
time.
Right, first question. You said Japan, Germany. I know when you spoke to Destiny, you said something about fear of like black crime in the United States or whatever, or even South Africa. That's
Well,
probably that's probably a
I
better
said, like,
example,
yeah,
right? Like
the arguments for like keeping racial quotas and
when you say
an
racial
ethnic,
quotas, what do you mean?
like Israel must have like this many Jews. We can't let this many Arabs in. If we got too many
Uh,
Arabs in, they'll overwhelm the vote, sort of thing.
okay, okay. So like control
I'm
over
aware that there are
borders.
millions of Arabs in Israel, by the way.
Yeah, yeah, like a fifth of the population. Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah,
like that again. Left, right, whatever Israeli Jew you find, they're going to want a Jewish majority. Yeah, unless they're fucking like
right.
Hadash or some crazy fucks. Yeah.
Which
Um,
is like, I mean, most states do this, but like it reminded me, and it was evocative of like white supremacist arguments for, well, if we let too many black people in, or if there are too many black people in this city, like then this will happen. And
okay.
like, even if that was true, if there was like a black crime gene, I don't think that justifies the ethnic cleansing. You'd have to like
Wait.
navigate that
Is it
in.
ethnic cleansing to control your immigration for demographics? To say
Uh,
you can't immigrate to
isn't it?
here on big enough into massive numbers, or
I guess it's not cleansing because it's preventing the ethnic shift at all. But
yeah,
it's like same
it's like saying
sentiment.
that if Arabs want to immigrate to Israel, we're probably going to have like low numbers to keep a Jewish majority. That's like the gist, right?
Sure, but I would view that as the same justification for, hey, there are too many Arabs in the country, let's export a bunch of them, right? Like it's the same mentality. Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. A couple of questions. No, wait. No. I think controlling immigration is very
Okay, wait,
different
hold on.
to,
Wait, let me say it one more time.
yeah.
Just to make sure we're on the same page.
Mhm.
I don't want anything to be misconstrued. Saying I'm going to prevent a certain quantity of this ethnicity or nationality from coming in is the exact same, even though it's not the same consequence, it's the same prescription as, oh, they're already here. Let's get that same number, that same ratio in this country. So either we're stopping them from coming in or we're kicking them out. Either way, this seems to be, I mean, obviously there are nuances of, oh, they're already here, but this is the same sentiment. We need to protect this ratio. We need to protect this majority.
Uh,
No?
okay. I see what you're saying in terms of like their mindset, but okay. I would rather get turned down entry to a country than kicked out of where I live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like why I
Okay.
said, like, well, if it's already here and this is your home, obviously you're going to have a
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
distinction there. But
Okay.
like, it's the same sentiment to
You're
me.
making me want to ask so many questions. Okay. So
Oh,
one.
well, okay, fire away.
You mentioned America or like a fear of like black racism or like Japan or apartheid South Africa is a good example, right? Like the fear of giving them voting rights because black people became the majority with voting rights, right? My question is, do you think anti-Semitism and anti-white racism are equally valid concerns?
I think the people who make the arguments view them the same, but I think anti-Semitism is a obviously much more realistic one. I mean, like, you know, there are people who say white genocide, that would be like the utmost, like you are conflating a slight decline in your demographics due to natural population shifts to this country came in and tried to wipe out the Jewish population versus like, yeah, like these are not the same thing. Like anti-white racism is not even close historically to
Yeah. So
anti-Semitism.
my
Yeah.
next question is Israelis don't want to be a minority in the Middle East. They don't want to be, and logically, any country that does become a majority there would be Arabs because that's their neighbors.
Mhm.
Can you name a single Arab or Muslim country in the last 100 years that has protected their Jewish minority adequately?
No.
So if Israel ceased to be this bad thing, you say, an ethno-nationalist state, preserving a demographic, if they cease to be that, how are you betting on what are your odds on the Israeli Jews and their futures?
Okay, well, this kind of goes into like the very beginning of what I was saying, which is like it is entirely plausible to me that if there was a significant Muslim voting bloc in this place that had anti-Jewish or anti-Israel sentiments, that this could lead to, you know, apartheid, it could lead to persecution, it could lead to ethnic cleansing of Jewish and Israeli people, and that would not be good. And that's not to say that like, oh, this is the natural consequence of what is going to happen, and you need to let it happen because what you're doing is bad right now. It's just is that the ultimate and only outcome? And does that necessarily justify every behavior taken to prevent
No,
that?
no, we're not
That's
talking about
what we're looking at.
justifying every behavior. I'm talking about the very simple principle, absent the other behavior. We're talking about the simple principle of Israel being allowed to exist as a Jewish state. They don't need to control the West Bank. They don't need to control Gaza. We're just talking about them existing as a Jewish state, like in this world. So that's basically them saying that we're going to control immigration. Yeah, and because it sounds like you think they don't have a right to want that. Huh?
Sorry, my fucking audio does the thing. It cut you off after world. My audience can hear you. I can't. I don't know why my
okay.
RAM does this.
What the fuck was I saying? From the world.
For this world, it's like not about justifying the action.
In this world, yeah. We're not talking about does this fear justify every action. I'm not asking you that. Obviously, it doesn't. Okay. I'm asking you if it justifies them wanting to preserve a Jewish majority in the country.
I mean, the sentiment is justified where it's like a valid fear to see, hey, I've seen that when similar populations get a majority in all these other countries, it seems to like result in our prosecution, death, whatever. Therefore, my fear is justified. But again, then that you have to then attach what are the prescriptions to that. And if the prescriptions are like ethnic like superiority things, like I don't know, like to what degree
wait. When you say ethnic superiority things, I'm just talking about one thing, which is they control immigration to the point that it keeps their majority. That's it. No, I'm not saying it justifies any of the poor treatment of minorities or whatever. Yeah, just they stay a Jewish majority, which means that if however many, I don't even know how many Arabs are trying to immigrate to Israel, but if a substantial number are, then they just limit their immigration.
Well,
are they justified to do that because of their fears?
I don't why can I say that today? Necessarily think so. I mean, what is the difference fundamentally between that and the people who say Muslims who immigrate to America are going to vote Democrat, elect Muslim Democrats, and fundamentally change the country from what we perceive as a Christian white nation into a DEI Muslim nation? Obviously, the consequences are much more misplaced, but like, why is that argument different? Like, it is going to change the country, whether or not they think it's bad or not, because it is going to.
Because the anti-whiteness or the anti-Americanism of Muslims who immigrate to the United States or the anti-whiteness of Muslims who come to the UK does not concern me in the way that anti-Semitism should concern Israelis. Like, I live in a Muslim community. Like I live in an immigrant community. There are Muslims fucking everywhere. I'm not walking up and down the streets worrying about whether or not one of them supports a terrorist organization that wants to kill me, right? If any Arab population becomes the majority in Israel, it would be Palestinians because of what they advocate for with the refugee problem, with right of return.
Okay, wait. The most popular. Pause there. So, like, basically, tell me if I'm portraying this wrong. The Palestinians necessarily are going to have such a bad anti-Jewish sentiment that it will cause Jews to be in danger. This is just like a given.
If every other Arab and Muslim country did it in the last 100 years, why would Palestinians not? Palestinians are the group that have the most excuse to be anti-Semitic, right? Literally, they actually have a good reason to hate Jews, let alone the countries that didn't have a good reason to. So yeah, I think if in this day and age, like in this foreseeable future, like in the world we live in now, not in 100 years, things could change. I don't think it's in their DNA or whatever the fuck. Like, that's crazy. But like, yeah, if Palestinians became the majority from the river to the sea in one country, yes, they would persecute the shit out of Israeli Jews. Yeah, that would be, yeah. Remember, to this day, Hamas are the most popular party in Palestine. Like, yeah. So,
but it's not. First of all, we know that they're not like a unanimous voting bloc, right? Like, it is.
You don't need to plurality. You only needed 3,000 of them to cross the border on October 7th. You want to integrate them into a country?
Well, that's what's like. Obviously, I think the disconnect here is like, if anyone doubts that I understand like how great anti-Israel sentiment is, I understand this. The problem I see is like, this is a more valid version of like the less valid, anti-immigration, white nationalist talking points. But it's ultimately the same to a degree where it's like, yeah, there are some portion of Muslim immigrants that are like super pro-Sharia, anti-American, but want to reap the benefits of the American state. Like, if it wasn't 100% of them, if it was 80%, if it's 40%, if it's 10%, like, at what point does it justify ethnic immigration policies? Like, I guess the dichotomy here is like, you have to have one or the other. And I'm not entirely sold on like that. Those are the only two options. Either you do this sort of ethnic population control, or you die. And that's kind of where I guess my issue comes in of like, is this really the only two paths forward that perpetually have to exist?
No, not perpetually. I don't, again, like I said, I don't think this is in Palestinian DNA, right? Like Jews and Arabs like they live together in Israel. The Arabs who live in Israel with Israeli citizenship are Palestinian, right? And they vote for parties like RAM, they come from the same reformist Islam like school of thought that Hamas came from, but they preach coexistence, right? Of course, it's not impossible, but we're talking about whilst this ideology still exists, and whilst you poll every Middle Eastern country on anti-Semitic attitudes and the protocols and the Holocaust and all that shit, you get like 70, 80, 90% strong anti-Semitic attitudes. Yeah, it's like you said, like when we talk about Muslims coming to the UK or America, like what happens? I think we've had one suicide bombing in 10 years with millions of Muslims living in the UK without, they're not all being monitored, and there's not like a military fucking breathing down their neck and surveilling their phones and all this shit all 24/7. We get one suicide bombing in 10 years. Israel, right, shares a border in a very small region with with West Bank and Gaza, and even with the Oslo Accords and with like some communities getting freed up with areas A, B, and C, or when you had like the blockade on Gaza, or when you had the occupation of Gaza ending with the settlers coming out, you get Hamas and you get rockets being smuggled in, and you get people crossing the border with paragliders to go and stab people and shit, or you get fucking suicide bombings. Like, yeah, this concern is just not the same. But yeah, it's like you were saying, like Jews have been told that you will not survive as a minority in any Arab or Muslim country in the last 100 years, but you should just take your chances with Palestine.
It's not about taking your chances. It's what needs to change before it's not justified to do it the way they're doing it. Like,
well, if it's not a legitimate threat, that's it.
But like you're basing this legitimate threat on this. You said like it's justified for a lot of them to have this hate because a lot of them are oppressed. War crimes are being committed against them, and so you say it's not perpetual, but this keeps happening. Like, let's say you get your ideal two-state solution type thing, like. Is Lebanon, is Syria, is Libya, is Egypt, are they allowed to also be controlled coming into the country, like to that extent? To
kind of are, like, I mean,
I know. Well, that's what I'm saying is like you say it's not perpetual, that it's not ingrained in their DNA, but then like what actually would need to change where you say, okay, now we don't need to do this anymore, right?
Well, they don't need to do it anymore. Is like that would be a situation where, let's say, instead of Hamas polling as the most popular party in the West Bank or in the refugee camps in Lebanon, whatever else, what if it was RAM? Right? What if it was the RAM party, which preaches coexistence? What if tomorrow, rather than River to the Sea and rather than like Hamas and all these chants and all that, there was a new leader of Palestinians who emerged as someone who actually was like Mandela and was saying, yeah, we're going to avoid attacking civilians. We don't want to harm civilians and our like future neighbors. We want peace and equality for two groups who want to share the land. If that was
where's that movement going to come from if the kind of like the circumstances are the way they are, right?
Well, that movement emerged in apartheid South Africa. That movement emerged under slavery in the United States. Like, yeah, if it can emerge in these situations, it can emerge in Palestine. Yeah, there are Palestinians who talk about this as well. The problem is that it's not just Palestine. It's the rest of the Arab world as well that is involved in this kind of like, again, most of these countries are dictatorships, and the control over the media is very tight, and like narratives are very limited. So there is still like, this is like, you asked me like things that need to change on both sides. The thing that needs to change on the Palestinian side is this idea that normalizing relations with Israel or with Israelis is like a sin. It's like the worst thing you can do. Collaborating, befriending, normalizing, it's all bad. Israel is supposed to be a temporary stain on the Arab Muslim world. That's it. But if they need to get over that needs to stop. And there are Palestinian leaders who have tried to push for this. They get ostracized. They get fucked by their own people. Like, yeah, like that happened back in the 40s and 50s. Yeah, there's just not space for them right now.
Would Israel taking steps to try to reduce the kind of limitation of Palestinian democratic say in Israel, would that not be a step towards like creating something like that to happen, or do you think that would just be fruitless?
Limiting Palestinian? What do you mean by limiting Palestinian democratic?
Like saying, hey, we can let more of you in and have more of a say in democracy here.
Again, you're just like the problem you're running into is that like think of it as like sectarianism, right? Like sectarianism in the Middle East is like, when you look at it as an outsider, it looks fucking crazy, right? Like they're all, it's like, it's arbitrary lines that are drawn that keep conflicts alive for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And it doesn't really help anyone to behave the way that they do in a lot of these ways, like whether it's in Lebanon or Syria. But the other, probably more dangerous thing is to just go to one group and tell them to let their guard down and just hope that the other side stops being sectarian in the same way, or doesn't reciprocate, or doesn't just like exploit a vulnerability or whatever. If Israel just starts allowing people in the West Bank to emigrate to Israel right now to get citizenship, then like unconditionally, then they're just taking their chances with someone who will like,
I'm
might
not
support
saying
Hamas.
like
Or,
just unconditionally let your guard down, but like, is that not kind of what you're saying needs to happen from the Palestinian side in order for this to change? Like, you guys just need to ignore every historical thing and get over all of your grievances and just say we want peace regardless, no conditions, right?
I don't
know, it
think
seems like
I don't think in 1952 or whatever, when Israel normalized with Germany, I don't think they ignored or forgot the Holocaust. I don't think they did that. No, you don't ignore your grievances. You sit there and you ask yourselves, what is this strategy and does it work? The current Palestinian strategy and the current mindset of seeing Israel as a temporary entity, that has clearly not worked. They don't need to ignore their grievances. No, they should demand accountability for their grievances. They should demand reparations to some level, I think. They should demand settlers go. But that's the thing. Like, imagine a Palestinian movement tomorrow in the West Bank that ditched Hamas, that ditched Islamic Jihad, and only targeted settlements, that maybe did like a Mandela style thing. Let's say they blocked settlers' roads like they do to them, or let's say they knocked out their energy supplies or their electricity lines, or let's say that they saw like a new settlement trying to get set up and they went and tore it down. And they fought with soldiers who tried to defend the settlers. And they said, yeah, we're going to be violent because this is a violent occupation, and we'll stop if you want, but just leave us alone. Get the fuck out of the West Bank. Let us have our country next to yours, and we'll be neighbors. If that was the Palestinian movement, like tomorrow, like Israel would be fucked. Like the Israeli right would be fucked as well, because everything they say about Palestinians will have been proven wrong. Like, and that's the issue there. But I'm not asking Palestinians to ignore their grievances or to ignore the pain. I'm saying that on their end, there needs to be a leadership and like a movement and a way of thinking about the conflict that actually helps them. Because right now, their current leaders are not doing that.
Okay.
Okay.
I think it's frustrating because I don't think you and I disagree on the fear or like the reason why Israel might have to maintain some sort of ethnic majority. I think the problem is that I don't see how it ever moves forward. Like it's funny because I'm like, damn, can anything change your mind? The answer is really no. It's exactly what I thought the first time I ever heard of this. Is like, it's just uber fucked, and so many extreme measures have to be taken that don't exist now, and I don't know how you manufacture those measures. I mean, I at the very least, first of all, I very much appreciate you taking this time, and I like that at the very least we can come to the prescription of like, hey, people in America today need to be holding our politicians accountable and saying like demanding certain conditional aids and actionable things to punish Israel for the worst things they're doing. But yeah, it just becomes this like super frustrating conversation for me because I can look at something bad and people are saying, you don't understand why they're doing it. It's like, no, I do. I just don't know if like that's the only option. And if the only option only has to come from like a movement or like some greater project within the oppressed people, like, I don't know. It just seems like this unfair sort of like, well, but that's not going to happen. Therefore, and then everything keeps happening the way it is. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, like we, like as Westerners, it's almost like what maybe you and some of the activists do as well. Is like, ironically, don't fall victim to like a progressive imperial mindset that exists as well. I think a lot of Westerners seem to overestimate the amount of power that they have over developments in other countries around the world. Like we can do some things. We can pressure the Israeli government, and we should pressure them a lot more than we do. But at the end of the day, like we can't change the conflict from just ourselves, right? Changes need to happen everywhere. Not just even Israelis and Palestinians. Qatar would need to change what they're talking about, because Al Jazeera is a very important player in the narrative of the Israel-Palestine conflict. Like like Jordan and Egypt would have to be involved in any kind of peace process that involves Palestinians. Lebanon is important. Syria is important. So there are limits to, like, we as Westerners, like, we can mitigate harm, or we can push Israelis into a more humanist, into a more liberal position. And that would probably also involve, like, maybe befriending left-wing Israelis, because they are probably, like, the most lonely group in the world right now. Not to mention Palestinian Israelis, then them too, right? Like, there are things that people can do, but yeah, it's like I don't know, like, I just don't have any faith in, like, the current, like, activist movement, because I don't think they're really, whatever they're doing, it's not a movement that sees a problem and wants to fix it. I just don't see that in them. I see like maybe like a social movement. I see, like for some people, it's a fucking fashion trend, like the white guys wearing keffiyehs to this day in, like, Western capital cities for whatever reason. Like, but yeah, I don't know. A lot needs to change everywhere, I guess. But I guess that's politics.
Okay. Well, appreciate you taking the
sorry.
time.
Just one question to go forward. Okay. This is like, if we have another conversation, you were talking about history and talking about, like, about Israeli decisions and, like, okay. I think one question is like, when you're looking at the history, especially with this whole thing about, like, Zionism and wanting a Jewish majority, I think a good question would be, at whatever point in the history, the 20s, the 40s, 48, what should Israelis have done differently? Because condemnation is one thing, but it's hollow when, like, it doesn't come with an alternative.
I said,
right?
When everyone was like, "Oh, you want ethnic cleansing?" Like, damn, they should have just put them all in Brooklyn. Obviously, America wouldn't have accepted this back in the 40s, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, like,
well, that's a question, right? In the 40s, like, when they're literally, when it's in the 40s, like in 47, when the UN is debating partitioning the land, and the Zionists accept it, and people say the partition plan was unfair. Arabs thought any partition was wrong. What should the Zionists have done rather than, like, support a partition plan? Like, that's one question, right? Or what should they have done at this point rather than trying to get?
I think that also puts too much onus on them, right? I think the international community should have, like, tried to rationalize the long-term consequences of displacing other people and tried to literally, like, find an island of, like, like, maybe, like, do, like, more of, like, a Madagascar type situation, or, like, I know, like, Liberia didn't work out, but it's like, you can't make the initial, gunshot be okay, and we're gonna fuck over a different population and just hope that this doesn't cause 80 years of animosity. Because I again, I don't know how you would have solved it at the time, but, like, this is I think a mistake on Britain's part, on the Zionist part, on the international community, like, not realizing the consequences. Like, I don't really know how you would have solved this, but, like, yeah, I would have said there needs to be something that isn't going to cause a conflict, which is such a stupid, like, oh, just don't do the bad thing. But this was clearly, I think, not the best solution. But
I think I would come back to that as, like, a recurring question. If you accept that, like, the first principle of Zionism is refuge and survival, like, what should they have done differently? I think that's probably, I don't know, that may be worth, if there's any historical whatever you want to talk about, or even current day, that might be worth asking about in the next.
I don't want to open up a can of worms. It's like, does Israel make, like, Jews internationally safer, like, in general? I mean, like, if every country potentially is, like, a few dictatorships away from, like, another Hitler situation, I would say yes. But, like, I don't know. Like, I think in the 21st century, it's just not nearly so cut and dry. And, like, I think obviously today, and I don't think this is not what I'm prescribing, but if every Israeli decided to, like, diaspora into Western countries right now, I don't think this would, like, make Israeli people less safe. But it seems to be like Israel's existence in the Middle East is probably causing more conflict and animosity than it otherwise would if there was, like, a Jewish diaspora at this point. So it's, like, not in the 40s, by the way. I don't know. Okay, well, yeah,
that's a good question. Is, like, when should they have decided to go somewhere else? At what point?
Well, but again, I'm not prescribing that. But, like, I don't know to what degree at this point it's solving the refuge problem, given all of the conflict now and the escalation and. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, I'll very briefly. So, like, in the late 1800s, you have, like, over 1,000 pogroms in 40 years in the Russian Empire. I think the British over 1,000 years purged the Jews, like, 3 times. The Spanish.
But I'm talking about, like, now, like, 21st century.
But you were asking if you think if Israel has made Jews internationally, or just Jews in general, since Israel is half the world's Jews, has it made them any safer? Yeah, of course it has. Because what the fuck was the world like for Jews before Israel? Like, they just came out of the Holocaust. Right, and before the Holocaust, I guess you had fascism all over Europe. Most Israeli Jews aren't European or American, by the way. Most Israeli Jews are Middle Eastern, North African. They're mostly non-white.
Yeah.
Of course they're safer than they were in Iraq and Libya. Like they're not going to, no Mizrahi Jew is going to get fucking hanged for like, because two Muslims said that they were Zionist collaborators. Yeah. So,
No, fair enough. And also, if you want to send me books that you might recommend, I'll do that as well. But yeah, let me know. I'll probably end up talking to a Palestinian activist in the near future, and then maybe set up a discussion at some point, because I like being the learner in this situation. It makes me feel I don't know, it makes me feel like I'm not wasting my time just like screaming about dumb definitions and shit. So that's fun. I appreciate the time you took.
Ehab Hassan and Hamza, they're two Twitter users. They're both really good too. I have much respect for them. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, send me some listen DMs, and yeah, thanks again. I appreciate you. You're really fun to talk to, and very patient with me. I appreciate that too. And yeah, I got to go talk to Dylan Burns. Apparently, it's going to be something about PV, so we'll see what that's about.
Well, the other great conflict of our time. All right, well, I really appreciate it, and you have a good day. Okay.
Yeah. Bye, loner community.
Take care. Bye. He's all right. He's a good dude. Did you guys enjoy that? I think you did. You're saying you did. You're DMing me to say you did. I see you. Whoa. Okay. My chat. He's nice and respectful, but kind of dense. What? You guys, never in your life, you assume that someone is stupid just because they are not hyper informed on your special interest. Don't do that. That's dumb. Intelligence is like, it's a process, okay? Like, fuck me. I don't think Soypill's a clever guy. What the fuck? No reason to believe otherwise. Just because he's big and muscly, okay? With a silly hat. I didn't look at his chat. Was that a good idea? I think that was a good idea. Who was the second activist you told him to look up? Like in the just 2 minutes ago? That was Hamza. I think he's just called Hamza on Twitter. Hawidi Hamza? This guy? He's a Gazan, actually. He came from Gaza. I think he lives in Germany now. He is an anti-Hamas Gazan. Him and Ehab Hassan are good as well, because they're not like Al-Khatib is maybe just like he goes with the Zionist narrative a little bit too much, but many in his chat quote dislike you. I saw some screenshots, but I'm just like I don't know what. All right, 3ds Max, thanks for the $5. Also, why not enough donations for such a wonderful conversation? You guys be ashamed. Although I did get lots of gifties. That's cool. ZJM, thanks to 20 gifted memberships and the $11. Shit. And Saigon, thanks for the tier 1 sub. ZJM for the $5. Active gold chat. True. Wait, what? Tell him to look up Drew Pavlik. Yeah, I'm going to give him this list. And if you want to talk to like Palestinian activists, I guess you guys can look for Twitter accounts to follow as well. Maybe Doobie should come and donate here. Well, I haven't platformed Destiny in like well over a year, have I? Irresponsible platforming. Terrible stuff. Okay.
Love you, Loner. You did great and you looked handsome.
Shut up! But thanks for the $10. I appreciate it. You did yesterday. Well, by watching, is that count as platforming? I thought it was like having him on. Whatever, I don't give a fuck. I do not need Doobie's tainted money. I think all of these people I spoke about have Twitter accounts. Ehab Hassan.
Good convo.
Bruh. Subscribe, you fucking assholes. I mean, sorry.